Hello and welcome to a very special episode of the Board Game Barrage podcast, a podcast about board games, the latest hotness, and how to have fun with your friends, even when you're losing. I am Kellen, your host, joined today by my friends, Mark and Neilan.
Hey.
Hello.
And my very special friend, Christina.
Hello.
If you are joining us for the first time, you've missed 4 epic weeks of a top 50 countdown of the greatest board games of all time.
A lot of ofs in that sentence.
Really?
Yeah, I think so, but it's fine.
Too many ofs?
I mean, I don't think you can avoid it.
I mean, people like
greatest
of
all time. I mean, you've got to hit a lot of ofs, but I'm just letting you know that you hit a lot of ofs.
Yeah, if I was editing that sentence, I would reword it probably.
Replace a lot of them with colons. Top 50 colon all time, colon 2020.
How many ofs were there? I don't know.
I actually wasn't even listening. I just was...
Okay.
There's a dead space. I'm trying to put a joke in there.
Okay, but you know that I'm trying to welcome people, and you're throwing off my groove.
I think Kellen's nervous because...
I'm not nervous. I've never been nervous. What would I be nervous about?
He keeps talking about, like, Christina, be on your best behavior today because all the listeners are going to be new. They don't want to hear your stupid in-jokes.
What?
That's going to be a new audience, and we want them to see that we're normal, I think. Is that what you said?
This is my ex-special friend, Christina. Today on this special episode of the Board Game Barrage podcast, we'll be counting down our 10 favorite board games of all time. That is going to get you 30 amazing board games. There is so much gaming goodness contained in this list. My advice to you is get out a pencil, get out a piece of paper. If you're too young to have heard of that, get out your iPhone and be ready to take some notes. Who's excited?
I am.
I'm excited. One thing I wanted to mention really quickly before we started is that the board game world has been rocked by a few prominent designers having, to put it plainly, pretty abhorrent worldviews and making a point of expressing those in the public space. One of those designers, Daniel Tzolk'in, has games who will be mentioned on this episode. I want to make absolutely clear that we in no way, shape, or form endorse anything about Daniel Tzolk'in as a person or his worldviews, and are purely talking about these games on the merits of the games themselves. You know, there's been a lot of discussion in this vein recently about what the appropriate level of separation of art and artist is. So one of the things I want to make super clear is that, you know, we're still grappling with all of this. It happened in the midst of us recording these episodes, but we felt it was pertinent to say something before we spoke about some of the games that he's designed. But please don't take that as endorsement of anything he's said. We'll be talking about the game strictly mechanically, and we're still figuring out how to handle coverage of these designers going forward.
Yeah, and another thing that is sort of difficult here is we made these lists with the idea that these are obviously our favorite games of all time. But now we find ourselves, while we have the lists as our favorite games of all time, now with some of the designs, I mean, I mentioned PAX Renaissance earlier from Phil Eklund, who's also been sharing some abhorrent worldviews for a while, to be frank. It's hard for me now to recommend these games. In creating a top 50 list, they're almost naturally the top 50 games you would recommend to people. But now we're in this area where these are the games that I have on my top 50, and this list may change in light of recent events, but they're no longer necessarily the top 50 games I would recommend. So it's just a hard area that these lists sort of fall into now.
So before we jump into the list, we did want to go around the room quickly and say how we put together our top list of board games, and then we will jump right into counting them down. So why don't we establish our order, which shall hereby be CKMN, Christina, Kellen, Mark, Neilan. Why don't you tell us how you put together your list in brief?
All right. Well, I used a fun little thing called Pub Meeple, which our friend Bob uses a lot. If you don't know about Bob, he's a few episodes ago, so you can go find him. But if you do know about Bob, then you know how awesome Pub Meeple is already. You can paste a list of anything you'd like, and then it helps you rank them by comparing them side by side. It takes you through, and it's a 1v1 of all of your games until you've ranked everything against each other, and then you have a list of 1 through however many you put in. This is an exhausting task to do with all of your games. So just grab 5 cups of coffee and be ready to take breaks and just be emotionally prepared. It's really exhausting. But at the end, you get a list. So I start there, and then I basically look at my list and see if things look weird. Surprisingly, the Pub Meeple list as it comes out is usually kind of how I like, because I also have a list in my head. I have a list of hundreds of games in my head at all times. And the Pub Meeple list usually matches that ranking pretty closely. So that method is very different from how Kellen does it, but I think that might be more similar to how Mark does it, at least.
So do you like Clue or Candyland better?
If you're Kellen, it's always Glue.
That's right. Professor Plum represent. I do a little different thing with this list. I take all of the board games that I own and I arrange them from least likely to most likely to get rid of. So the first 1 through 50 would be the 50 games that I would keep if there was a fire or if I had to pack them all into a car and leave. By virtue of that, some genres of games that I like end up with games kicked out. So for example, Area Control, much love for Area Control. And there are many Area Control games that might make the tail end of my top 50, but I already have so many in my collection that what I'm doing is curating and cultivating a collection or a library of 50 board games that I would most recommend to people and that I would keep if I could only have 50.
I forgot to say how I actually decide when I'm doing the 1v1, which seems like the most important part. So my thought process in every single 1v1 is at any time, would I rather play this or this? And I have a memory moment of, I watch the memory movie of all the times I've played each game, and then I decide which one I would pick, which one I would rather play all the time.
By the way, memory moment is TM, Board Game Barrage.
Yes.
I, like Christina, use the Pub Meeple ranking system. What I do is I take every game that I have ranked 6 or higher on BGG, because I can't imagine any of my games that are ranked 5 or lower are going to make it jump up to a top 50 ranking. And then I also include all the unranked games that I've played. And so that is my list going in. And then when it comes to comparisons, the way I do it is when I see two games opposing each other, I think of if I got a call to play both those games in ideal circumstances. So I consider both games, if I had enough time and if I had the ideal player count, which game would I play? That is the way I usually go about it.
Is this like the guy on Friday night who's deciding which friend group he likes better when he gets invited to multiple parties?
I mean, I am that guy.
Yeah, I was going to say, Mark is definitely always deciding.
That's right.
Is that why you always leave?
That's
in the
right.
middle of the night?
Well, I'm trying to get the best of both worlds. Stay as long as I can in one and then transition. Maximize joy.
Illuminating.
Maximize joy.
Is it fun living that way?
It's exhausting.
I think you should look up loyalty, Mark.
For me, one of the things I wanted to call out, actually, which is, I think, a really good point Mark made, is the ideal circumstances thing. Because, at some point we're comparing party games to, heavy strategy games, and do I want to play the heaviest game if I'm just with my friends at the 5 minutes of the evening are winding down? Obviously not. So yeah, it's always a comparison of if I had the ideal circumstances for both games, which would I pick? I do the Pub Meeple thing too, but I only do it for games that aren't on my previous year's top 50. So what I do there for that is to see what the possibility of new entries coming onto that list is, and then I kind of just maneuver things around based on those new entries and my previous year's list. And one of the reasons I kind of do that is because the thing I think about the most when I'm engineering these lists are two competing forces almost, this idea of legacy, which we've spoken about before, which is the games that aren't necessarily ones I'm still playing every day, but they were meaningful, extremely meaningful at some point in time, and over the course of time sometimes those ship down. And recency is also something that I feel sometimes plays a very prominent role in determining what games I want to play this year versus last year, whether it's a game that has meant something to me in recent history, and that will do a lot to move things up my list. And I feel those two forces compete with each other a little bit to slide things around on my top 50. That's about the gist of it.
I think that's a very good point. And also, I just want to say, I assumed that ideal circumstances were implied. So
you didn't say that.
All right. Before anyone clicks away, let us get to the goods, the top 10 board games of all time.
All right. Wow, this feels so momentous,
That's right.
Are we going to have really epic music now?
Yeah.
Yeah, every game.
It's going to be Ride of the Valkyries behind everything.
So that you can't hear anything
Yeah,
but
right.
Ride of the Valkyries.
All right. My 10th favorite game of all time is a game called I'm the Boss. This is a pure negotiation game in which you are attempting to create business deals with the right people at the right time. In these business deals, you are required to take a certain combination of people, but that combination of people can be drawn from various different people who are actually sitting at the table. And so what happens is every single time you're creating a business deal, you have everyone just vying to get in on the deal. You have people saying, I'll go in for less money, take me, I only need to be paid this much. When every single business deal is happening, you're trying to remember how much money everyone has, because you're like, well, I'd love to take Mark because he's my ally, but at the same time, I think he has like millions of dollars already. And so I'm like, Mark, I'll take you, of course, but only if you come in for $1 million instead of the $9 million that you should get for this deal. Anyways, you're splitting up the money. You're having these arguments. You're just shouting at your friends, and it can be so like maddeningly frustrating, but it's equally satisfying, especially if you like shouting at your friends and arguing and just pretty much arguing about nothing, which is what we do even when we're not playing games. So to me, the reason this game is my 10th favorite game of all time is because of the experience that it creates every single time. This is, to me, way more of an experience than a game, but the structure of the game is still so solid. It's great. We have a wonderful time every time we bring out I'm the Boss.
I think that if you have players in your game group who are sort of chaotic neutral or chaotic evil, there will be much fun and pleasure to be had in I'm the Boss. There is a looseness to this game. It is an older game from Sid Saxon that allows for just ridiculous play that probably wouldn't make it past an editor in a 2020 edition of I'm the Boss, but just some spectacular moments near the end and the half of the game where you could work on a negotiation for 30 minutes and have gotten everyone at the table happy except for Mark, and then Mark gets to play a card that says I'm the Boss, and literally all 30 minutes are down the drain, and then he starts it over.
Just the way I like it.
Yeah, and that happens. And you do, when you have that I'm the Boss card, that's exactly what you do. You just wait. You just wait until the perfect moment.
And like either that sounds spectacular to you and you're like, oh my God, I want to do this to someone, or you've just realized that you never want to play I'm the Boss. And I think that is totally fine, but what a great game.
That is my 10th favorite game of all time, I'm the Boss.
My 10th favorite board game of all time, when Neilan spoke of legacy, I think of Cosmic Encounter. Cosmic Encounter is my 10th favorite board game of all time. This has been moving down my list for those who've listened to the podcast for a number of years, previously occupying the number 1 spot. Cosmic Encounter is a game that has been around through, I believe, 4 iterations and versions, the most current version made by Fantasy Flight. In Cosmic Encounter, you have a unique alien power that no one else has, and in the current version, there's over 100 of these if you buy expansions, and those powers largely color your game. And unlike many asymmetric player power games, these powers are not balanced. Explicitly, they are not balanced. Mark could have a power that's better than all of our powers, and that entire game becomes everyone versus Mark. The function of Cosmic Encounter is a hand management game where you're attacking other players' planets and inviting allies. Neilan, I want you to come with me. Christina, I want you to come with me. And then Mark has to decide, okay, who does he want to ally with in defense? Cards are played, battles are drawn, silly powers allow you to cheat and do things that no one should ever be able to do in a board game. A riotous time for a group of people who are interested in it. And that's largely why it's fallen down my list. Mark and Neilan and Christina do not love this game as much as I do, which has led me to not play it over the course of the last few years. I hold out hope and keep all of my content for Cosmic Encounter that one day we may have that glorious game that they can understand it.
I thought you were going to say you hold out hope that you'll someday have the right group of 3 people surrounding you.
That's your friend.
Play this game as your friends.
I have in the past said that it is a you problem and not a Cosmic Encounter problem. They attempted this year to make a 2-player version of Cosmic Encounter, and there is an important word in that sentence, and it is attempted. It's very tough for me to speak about Cosmic Encounter, and I am not about to cry, but Cosmic Encounter truly is what got me into board gaming. No question. There is nothing that I remember more from college than playing Cosmic Encounter. And it is a product designed for board gamers. It is a niche thing that not everyone can get. And I think that's okay. I really love Cosmic Encounter. And think everyone should at least try it at some point, but don't try it at a convention with random players that you don't know, because it won't be good. I promise you, that is Cosmic Encounter.
Are those not ideal conditions?
The ideal conditions are have good friends, something that I do not have. My top 10 favorite board game of all time, Cosmic Encounter.
My 10th favorite game of all time appears on somebody else's list. So I won't be talking about it now, but get ready, because it's muy big.
Perfect.
There you go.
You sound so glib after I was just crying, Mark.
My number 10 favorite game of all time is a game that's kind of hard to know how to talk about because I feel like everyone listening to this at least has probably played it. It's Codenames. Codenames is a word party game where players divide into two teams. You lay out a grid of cards, and some of those cards are secretly designated as belonging to either team. A clue giver on both teams is going to be giving you a one-word clue and a number of cards that correspond to that clue, and it's up to the other players on their team to try find the words that belong to their team. What I love about Codenames is that those clues can be as personal as you want them to be. You can't rely on in-jokes, but you often want to give clues that are specifically catered to the people you're giving those clues to. And threading that needle of finding the right clue specifically for the people on your team is something that feels like a magical moment when you get it right. When you give the perfect clue and someone calls out the exact cards you wanted, it just feels amazing every single time. I think it's a game that's also light enough that I will never, Mark has said this before, and I will never turn down a game of Codenames. I think the reason it's remained as high on my list as it has is because it's still just the most delightful version of this sort of word game. I've mentioned before that games like Decrypto, which feel like a bit more gamery, a little bit more intense, are creeping up my lists steadily. I think this is probably the last year Codenames will be on my top 10 because, truth be told, as much as I love it, I've played a lot of Codenames, so much so that the desire to want to play it is lessening a little bit.
Neilan, I have a question for you. Why do you think it is that Vlaada Chvátil has only made one good game, and that game is Codenames?
This is factually untrue. It's not even the highest Vlaada Chvátil game on my list, you monster. Vlaada Chvátil's a fantastic designer. At various points in time, I might have called him my favorite designer. You're straight up wrong.
You're right. He designed Codenames Disney, Codenames Pictures,
exactly.
Codenames Duet,
all other
Codenames Marvel,
games.
Codenames Marvel Infinity Gauntlet, Codenames Marvel Spider-Man 3 Edition,
Codenames Harry Potter,
Codenames Marvel,
Codenames Pictures.
Oh no, Codenames Overwatch,
Codenames
PM,
Triple X. Is that what the black box?
Codenames After Dark.
That's right.
I think it's under. Is it After Dark?
I think it might be After Dark.
They did 2 editions of that,
Oh, no.
so I've never been able to track down the first edition.
That is Codenames, my 10th favorite game of all time.
My 9th favorite game of all time is a game that includes the most endorphin-packed 2 syllables you will ever encounter. And those 2 syllables, one starts with woo and the other one is a who. And this game is called Doppelt so clever or Twice as clever. Twice as clever is the best roll and write game of all time. This is without a question my most played game of 2020. That's mostly because of the app. So I have played probably like 1,000 games at this point on the app because I just can't stop trying to beat my own score. And it's such a puzzly roll and write that you really just finish a game and you instantly want to start another game because you were so close to getting these incredible combos and like solving the puzzle in a way you've never solved it before. And it's just so much more satisfying than other roll and writes. There is a literal endorphin rush that happens when one combo triggers another bonus that triggers another bonus that triggers another bonus. And it literally is like with every single one, you're just getting more and more amped until you see the numbers like you're at the casino. They're just flying up. And it's so exciting. It's so much fun. It is a great solo game. It's even better when you're playing with other people because you have to take more into consideration. There's some hate drafting. It is so much fun. I love this game, and so does Neilan.
Yeah, it's also my favorite roll and write. It was the highest climber on my list by far this year. I think for similar reasons, Christina, just the fact that I played it so much this year.
Yeah.
I've mentioned this before. I was emboldened by having played the real version of the game, the non-app version of the game with the two of you, and just being reminded how good a multiplayer game it is, especially in the roll and write space, where you feel like so much pressure to draft correctly based on what other people are looking for as well. Fantastic game.
What about Pass the Pigs? It's a pretty good rolling, right?
That is a pretty good roll and write, actually.
Roll those pigs.
Who doesn't love rolling pigs?
You gotta say yoo-hoo. You can't. What do you didn't even do it once.
I know, but I can't do it very well.
Yoo-hoo!
Maybe. Oh, there you go. Maybe Neilan could do it this time.
I think Kellen just nailed it.
No.
But Kellen thinks it's yippee.
Oh yeah. Damn it.
Kellen, do it.
No. I will say that every roll and write does get compared to Twice as Clever or Gauntshon Clever. In when you get 2/3 of the way through the game and you aren't comboing and having a great time, you're like, I wish we were just playing Twice as Clever.
That is my 9th favorite game of all time, Twice as Clever, doppelt so clever.
The 9th best board game of all time, not even my favorite, but the 9th best board game of all time, comes to us in an unassuming box about chameleons. This is Coloretto. Coloretto is a family weight game that punches so far above its weight that every gamer should own Coloretto, and every non-gamer should own Coloretto, because Coloretto should be sold in every target location in the world. In Coloretto, you're playing a very simple hand management game where there are 3 hops. You may have heard of these as
Heaps or hoppers
heaps,
is another fan
or
theory.
hoppers, or arrays. Piles.
Yeah, sure.
You are building 3...
Just we call them hops.
You're building 3 hops of cards, and on your turn, once you pick a card up from the deck, you must put it in one of the hops. And alternatively, you can just take a hop. This is painful. Every turn is painful because each hop can hold up to 3 cards. And so you might sit there and think, well, there's only 1 card there, but I really desperately want it. And then you may flip a card that you actually don't want, and you have nowhere else to put it but in the hop of the card that you love, and you have tainted your hop. You are trying to collect sets of chameleons in specific colors, but you only score 3 sets of colors. And so you actually score negative points for the sets after that. So it gets more and more punishing near the end of the game. One thing you may ask is, but how does this work for 2 players? Because that's the most common question that anyone asks. And the answer with Coloretto, brilliantly. Instead of having 3 hops of 3 cards available, you have 3 hops, and each hop can hold 1, 2, or 3 cards. So it actually ups the strategic complexity, because when you draw a card, not only are you deciding which hop to put it in, but you're deciding in relation to the maximum size of that hop. Coloretto has very charming artwork, no matter what edition you get. There is something very powerful in the let's sit down and play a card game together, and Coloretto is that slot for me. I will never get rid of this, even when I flame out and get tired of all the board games. Neilan?
I think you meant heaps. Coloretto is fantastic. It was on my top 50 list as well. It strikes me as the game that everyone should own. It's one of those things where I just spoke about Codenames. I think Codenames is rapidly becoming that game that you're going to see in everyone's home going forward, but Coloretto strikes me as another one of those games. It's like Uno in its accessibility, but it's so much more satisfying in a strategic sense than a lot of those simple family card games are, but anyone can play it. That marriage of like push your luck and sort of set collection is so perfect in Coloretto.
I think this is one that many people don't believe us that we love so much. There may be a game higher on Mark's list that people won't believe, and that's because that game is not very good. But this one, Coloretto, is that good.
And this is a triple crossover.
Yeah.
Triple crossover.
But not quadruple crossover.
Yeah, meaning only the 3 of us and not Mark.
That's right.
And that is Coloretto, the 9th best board game of all time.
My 9th favorite board game of all time is higher up on somebody else's list also. And I would tell you more, but since we're so far along in this, I can only use hand signals and gestures, and that doesn't really work for a podcast, so I'm just going to pass it along to Neilan.
I like the idea that like every one of your games could be higher up on someone's list and you just don't talk the whole episode.
Yeah. You would like that idea.
My 9th favorite game of all time is a game that I've joked previously. It just keeps creeping higher and higher up my list, and it's creeped 1 spot higher this year. It is Pictomania. Pictomania is an excellent party game. It is by all accounts, a Pictionary variant, but it is my favorite Pictionary variant. The premise of Pictomania is that you have a grid of cards with lots of words on them. You secretly are allocated one of the words on those cards, and then everyone at the table is drawing their word at the same time. But, as Kellen likes to say, you're also in the same space of time trying to find time to guess other people's pictures. Because at some point, once you feel like you've satisfactorily drawn your picture and satisfactorily guessed everyone else's picture at the table, you grab one of the score chits in the middle of the table, and those decrease in value as time goes on. So you want to be the person that's going to get your picture clearly communicated to everyone and be able to guess every single person at the tables before anyone else. The best thing about this is that you're assigning what word you think everyone has drawn based on handing out chips. You often get to a point where you're just like, wait, no, this chip I thought belonged to Mark, but it clearly belongs to Christina. And you just have this second guessing craziness as you realize where in that chain you've gone wrong by handing these chips out. Pictomania is a very stressful game, especially as the rounds go on, because the words just get so obscure and so crazy. And you're drawing the concept of democracy on your card while everyone else is like wrestling with other insane concepts in the process of drawing. But that manic craziness about trying to guess the weirdest words whilst trying to draw them all at the same time and doing this under time pressure is so delicious.
Let me ask you this, Neilan.
Yes.
What rank in your favorite board games of all time is the 40-yard dash?
It's not on it.
Oh, really? That's kind of surprising because you have Pictomania here in your 9th favorite list.
I don't know what you're trying to say.
Yeah, I don't get it.
It's just a stupid race. No one cares how fast you can go. It's not a mechanism.
It is a mechanism. How is that not a
Racing
No, it's
mechanism?
not.
is literally like a fundamental mechanism.
No. Not race as in like a race game. This is literally like dexterity race. So
Two mechanisms.
I disagree, actually. I disagree.
It's going to get worse and worse.
Because I think one of the things that's so clever about Pictomania is that the trade-off of knowing how slapdash you need to draw versus starting to guess, or trying to draw and guess at the same time, and then you realize after a certain point in time that people can't figure out what yours is, so you need to return to it. Like, trading off between drawing and guessing is so much of the experience there.
So it's like Telestrations, except in between each turn you have to run a lap around the track.
Yes, sure, Kellen, it's exactly like that.
And then the first person to get around the track gets 4 points, and then the second person gets 3 points.
Okay, while Kellen is just going to make fun of this game, I'm going to say the truth, which is I can't do it. I just can't. I can't do it. I get too stressed out. I can't multitask. My brain says no thank you, and I want to cry because I'm doing a bad job. I can't play it. I'm sure it's a good game. I'm sure it is.
I get that. And I think there have definitely been points in time where people have said exactly that. Like, it's just too stressful for me. For whatever reason, while I acknowledge it's a stressful game, it's a sort of stress that I love. It's not something I always like in the games I play, but just the way it heightens the game does so much more to me than other similar drawing games.
Yeah, like it becomes an experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Not to overuse.
Exactly.
Well, I will overuse that word this episode because I feel like that those are the games that end up on your top 10. It's the games that are always experiences.
Right.
You
And
know?
the games that sort of so readily draw to mind specific games of it when I was like competing with Mark in a round, which is every game of Pictomania, by the way. But yeah, it is phenomenal. It's another Vlaada Chvátil game, actually, funnily enough. It's a Vlaada Chvátil game that's better than Codenames, Kellen.
This is a double crossover with me. I love Pictomania. Look, it's Pictionary where you draw and guess at the same time. I mean, it's genius. What else do you need to say?
Exactly.
Nothing.
Well, you're also running.
There's no running.
Also a race.
All right, I forgot the running aspect. So wear shorts and...
Carry a water bottle. That is Pictomania, my 9th favorite game of all time.
My 8th favorite game of all time. I'm so excited. I don't even want to say it.
All right, skip it.
No, it's Blood Rage. Okay. Blood Rage is an Eric Lang troops on a map area control game, and it's a troops on a map game in one of the most streamlined and cleanest forms that I've ever seen. This is obviously a genre that I really, really love, so this is a highly contested spot, the area control game or games that end up on my top 10 list. But Blood Rage just really hits all of the right notes for me in the troops on a map genre. It has super simple battle that's super easy to jump into. It has a build your own asymmetric power system that uses incredibly painful card drafting. It has an upgrade system that you're constantly reevaluating because you can't possibly do everything you want to do. It just creates these really tough decisions every single turn around whether to upgrade, whether to invade and join the pillaging and the battling, because you can't do it all. The timing is so tight. You have to be so precise with when you're doing certain things. This game, more than almost any other game in my mind, feels like every single decision can be game changing. Every decision you make, every move you make is so important. And it gives you that experience, though, without being overwhelming. There's not that sense of analysis paralysis because you know what you want to do. You just can't do all of it. One of the things that I love about this is there are 3 ages, and at the beginning of each age, there's the drafting phase. And at the end of the drafting phase, you have 6 cards in your hand. So you only have 6 things that you can really mess around with. So it's not completely overwhelming, and you want to do all 6 of those things. You know what some of your other opponents have in their hands. So you're kind of thinking about those things, and when they play a card or when they make a move, changes your plan. But it's just, everything is so tight that it just moves like this machine that's like perfectly built machine. It's so good.
I think the most annoying and fun thing about Blood Rage is at the start of an age and you've got all these cards and different things you could do. And I always want to upgrade my clan, but then other people have established their troops on the map using those turns, and then they start pillaging stuff. So I'm sitting there going like, well, my boat's going to be cooler than yours if it ever gets on the board. You know, my clan leader is the best of all of us, but you've already pillaged half the map by that point. And so the timing is critical. You know, you have a quest in your hand, but the second that everything is pillaged, the round ends. And so you have to take a turn and turn in that quest. And it's so frustrating because you want to make sure you time it just right, but there's enough chaos in Blood Rage that you never get through all of your plans.
It's also just so simple, and I love the complicated troops on a map games too, but it's so easy to understand all of the systems and how they work together. It just feels like perfect. I don't know.
To Christina's point, I remember when I first taught this game, I was going to bring it to a game night, and I sort of had a similar experience to the one I had with Cthulhu Wars, where I saw all these plastic minis, and I saw these like this big Kickstarter, which Blood Rage also had, similar to Cthulhu Wars. Like, you know, all these people had all these Kickstarter extras and all this plastic, and I thought it was going to be this like really complicated thing to explain. And so I remember reading the rule book and thinking, oh, wow, this is actually pretty straightforward. And as Christina said, like pretty simple and pretty intuitive. And I just remember that being a very clear thought I had as I was learning how to play the game. Like, oh, this is not as intimidating as I thought it was, and actually makes sense and is like simple and fun, and yeah, a great game.
I actually almost feel like I owe Christina and Kellen a little apology about Blood Rage, because as recently as 4 episodes ago, I think I was like maybe talking down a little bit when Kellen brought it up. I played Blood Rage a couple of weeks ago for the first time in years, and I had a very profound new appreciation of it. Playing it with better people, obviously, has probably a lot to do with it. But
excuse me, who are these people?
But Blood Rage, in my mind, suddenly became like a very smartly realized system. Like, it has an ish level of simplicity where, like, yeah, the draw of it, the complexity is on those cards that you're drafting. And I think that, to your point, Christina, one of the things I like about it so much is almost like Kemet, where you all start off equal, but you're building your own upgrades. You're building your specialization over the course of time. And the way that those specializations get crazier and crazier in each of the 3 phases, watching people's like eyes when they look at those cards and they're just like, what? It's so good.
That is Blood Rage, my 8th favorite game of all time.
My 8th favorite board game of all time is higher on someone else's list, so I will just clutch my Best Shadow award and wait for that to happen.
My 8th favorite game of all time is one that I'm hoping to get played by my fellow tanks this year. This is 1830, an 18XX game. This is 1830 Railways and Robber Barons. This is not the first 18XX game, but it is, I think people would agree that it's the fundamental 18XX game. A lot of games are built off of the 1830 system. There are 2 basic branches of 18XX games. There's ones where you are rewarded for running companies well, and there's ones where you are rewarded for manipulating the market well. 1830 is the stereotypical example of the latter, the economic stock manipulation system. And it's therefore a little more punishing than other ones. It stays away from the Euro side of things and is more about manipulating and striking when you can, and is therefore the one I like slightly more than 1846, which is more about running companies well. 18XX was a genre of game. Speaking of games that seemed daunting before I got into them, 18XX was a genre of game that I thought was its own niche, and it certainly is its own niche, but one that I thought I would never be able to get into. It just seemed like a whole different world. And one of my friends, Andreas, decided he wanted to give it a shot, and we tried a couple games out, and I absolutely loved them. It's hard to play games like this with people who are very experienced. I am certainly not very experienced, but some people, this is like their lifestyle game. And
do you have the little sucky thing? That
I don't have the sucky thing. Andreas bought a whole bunch of sucky things, so he's got sucky all over his house.
That's the best part, huh?
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I would say that if you and friends are interested in trying this genre out, give it a spin. You know, there's a time commitment to a lot of these, although some of the more introductory ones play a little quicker. And I think 1889, which takes place in Japan, is one that we've talked about being our introductory game. So I'm excited about that possibility. But yeah, 18XX is its own sort of world of games. It may not be a world that you like, but I would say, you know, dip a toe into that world and see. Maybe it'll open up new frontiers of gaming joy that you didn't even know were possible, as they did for me. So my 8th favorite game of all time is 1830.
My 8th favorite game of all time is Gods of Atlantis. I think technically this should be Gods of Atlantis 2, but I felt a little bit weird saying that given that that game hasn't technically been released. I have played a lot of Gods of Atlantis 2 in its current incarnation, at least online, and I would wholeheartedly recommend that when that becomes available. But Gods of Atlantis, for those that don't know, is a game that seeks to create the MOBA genre of video game. So that is games like League of Legends, Defense of the Ancients, Heroes of the Storm, like that sort of real-time strategy adjacent game where you're controlling a hero on a team versus team match where you're trying to get your team to the enemy's base by pushing their minions slowly towards that goal. These games are also largely characterized by having unique heroes that level up with new abilities and get new items along the way. And I think the thing that Gods of Atlantis does better than a lot of other games in this genre is it kind of streamlines a lot of the more fiddly elements of minion management or getting items. It boils the entire game down to just very clean, simple card play. Every hero has a unique deck of 5 cards, and on every turn, you just choose one of those cards to play simultaneously for the turn. They all get revealed and activate in initiative order, and that is the entire extent of a turn. It's a very clean rule set, and all of the complexity comes through how unique each of those heroes' abilities are. Gods of Atlantis 2 does a lot to address some of the minor issues of Gods of Atlantis 1, which is to say it reduces the play time, it adds more uniqueness to each of those heroes, it makes the map a little bit more aggressive in a way that gets you to the action faster. I like so much about this game that despite the fact that I've been unable to play this game this year except online, it still sits in my head as a game that I want to keep revisiting, trying all the different heroes out, getting good at specific heroes. It feeds a love of MOBA games, which I've had for an extremely long time, in a way that no other board game like it does.
This probably bleeds the closest to like a lifestyle game in a box. Like there isn't any, buy booster packs here, but it does require some level of commitment. I've kind of always dreamed about some kind of tournament, Neilan, where we have like the people who are really good at the game and then like noobs, you know what I mean? Like it's almost like 3 players who know exactly what's going on and then Kellen who's just like trying not to die. Such a fun system to explore and almost like a sport.
Yeah.
I feel like you'd have a weekend where all we do is play Guards of Atlantis very fast over and over again and like kind of come up with teams or little mini teams and then fight each other and try to like one up with different heroes and stuff. It's just so daunting that it's hard for me to like commit to that, even though it's such a...
Totally. And I think that's unfortunately one of those things that is absolutely true. Much like the video game as it's emulating, like there's a little bit of a barrier to entry, but I think once you get past that, there is so much great satisfaction in the learning curve on the other side. That is my number 8 game, Guards of Atlantis, or Guards of Atlantis 2.
Oh, you're doing that again?
Pick which one of those two is your favorite.
My 7th favorite game of all time is The Voyages of Marco Polo. I almost said Marco Pollo from our joke. That's just what I think of now. Just to call out, this is a Tashini game, so like we discussed in the upfront, that's something to consider. But The Voyages of Marco Polo is a worker placement game with asymmetric player powers, and it's a worker placement game where the value of your dice determines the strength of your workers. And while that might sound punishing or super luck-driven, it's actually not, because there are so many things that you want to do that there will always be options, even when you roll as badly as Neilan always does. So this is just such a unique Euro game because, one, the asymmetric player powers are just so wild. They're unexpectedly game-breaking. For example, one of the player powers is that you literally can make your dice any value you want. Every time you take a turn, you can say, this one is going to be a 6, and also this one's going to be a 6. So that just gives you an example of like how wild these powers are and how much they can change your play. And so it's one of those games where you just want to play again and again and again because you want to try all of the different player powers. It's like, oh, Kellen got to have the super cool one last time. I want to try that this time and see how I do it. I just love how tense and blocky this game is. Each turn feels like a puzzle that has a right answer, but you also have to like make sure you're solving that puzzle faster than everyone else is because you're racing so that you don't get blocked out. You're just constantly having to reevaluate in order to get where you're going. You have to constantly be reevaluating, which I just love.
This is a double crossover with me. This game was higher on my list, and we've talked about this earlier, but with the Part 2 that came out, which I think is an inferior game, but for whatever reason, the fact that Part 2 came out sort of took away a little bit of the luster of Part 1 for me, although, you know, it is a really, really great game, and one of my favorite games to teach because of the player power thing, which I always hold until the end. Like, I explain the game, and then at the end, I'm like, but one of you won't even have to roll the dice, because this is that power, and then one of you has 2 people on the board instead of just 1. Like, all the powers are just crazy, like you said, and just awesome.
It sounds like deception, like deceiving all the people, like lying to them about what the game is.
Tricking people into playing a nice Euro game.
Whatever it takes. Whatever it takes. I'm not above it.
It is a whole lot of fun, and I thought we all loved it more than we did.
No, it was very, very close to being on my list. It's genuinely like a couple of notches below my top 50.
It is a extremely solid Euro game. Like, when I think of solid Euro game, Voyages of Marco Polo is right there.
I also say this game feels like the best in terms of length of play. Not in terms of like the minutes played, but it always feels like it ends one round too early, and I think it's like perfect timing for how long a game should last.
That is The Voyages of Marco Polo. Gosh, I can't get Pollo out of my head. That is The Voyages of Marco Polo, my 7th favorite game of all time.
My number 7 favorite board game of all time is another people on a map game or area control game. This is Inish. This has risen a couple of spots from last year where it was in spot number 9. When I think of board games as products or as like objects, I think Inish is one of the most self-realized things or objects in my collection. And that starts really with the Celtic artwork. This features just the most beautiful illustrations in it, and tons of them. And the hexes in the game are these weird shapes that fit together and interlock in weird ways. That as an object, Inish, it has a sense, every part of it is right. And sometimes I look at these productions and I go, oh my God, you put metal meeples in the game, you know, with screen printed double-sided player boards, and you know, you've got stickers on your sleeves, and it's just gross. But Inish has this sense of what it is, and it's a spectacular game of negotiation and area control. The central conceit of the game is that you are drafting these green cards, and there are only 16 of them. And so your knowledge of those 16 cards is supremely important as you pass them and draft them. Compared to a game like Blood Rage, which has a much bigger deck, Inish is controlled, but then that control is thrown out the window by another deck of cards that has amazing, spectacular abilities that you'll never see all of in a game. Inish is constantly a negotiation. It has brain-dead, simple combat that is allowed to end whenever you want it to end. Do you want it to end, sir? No, I do not want it to end, sir. Okay, we will keep battling. One of my favorite things for some reason is that you are building the map as you go. And I just love the idea. I was always the kid in Risk that ran away to Australia, and in Inish, it's like, oh, Neilan put a troop on the map over there. I'm just going to build the map that away because Neilan's not anywhere near that away. And you can literally build the map that away. And that sounds dumb, but it also somehow works in this scene of this artwork, in this place, in this time. I'm not doing a great job describing it. There are 3 victory conditions, and you must have gotten one of those victory conditions. And by the way, those are related to 666, which somehow is thematic. 6 this, 6 that, a 6 of another thing. And then you grab a pretender token and you say, I think I can win. And then everyone at the table goes, what? He can grab the pretender token? What? And then everyone has to try to also get to that position or the game will end at the beginning of a subsequent round. And so it's just a classic system. It's all there. And every time I play it, I have such an appreciation for it. It scales wonderfully. I'm in awe that this game exists. And that's a weird thing to say. It's such a good game. Everyone should try it. Not everyone will love it. It is very negotiation forward. Another little thing that I love is that some of the cards are march and fight, and some of the cards are march and, have a festival. And so it's like, well, I'm coming over, and Neilan's like, don't you come over? And I'm like, well, no, this is the nice card. Like, we're not fighting. I'm just coming into your territory. Inish, for some reason, just means a lot to me, which is weird to say as it's a newer release, a game I will always play, always want to play.
I love Inish as well. It's on my list as well. It's my number 14. And I think that you've nailed pretty much all the points that I like about it, Kellen. Like how striking it is as a production, when you see the weirdly shaped territory tiles and the giant oversized tarot cards that will have this lavish art on them. It doesn't look like anything on it. And that comes down to like even the box. There are 2 versions of this game and each one is equally striking as box designs go. And that's, something that's often overlooked in board game design. It's such a great presentation and married with such a delicate balance of negotiation and don't tread on me sort of like gameplay where you can coexist but only to a point, because at some point someone will take the pretender token and put a big sign in their head saying, come at me, I'm about to win, and then the whole game turns at that point. It's such an incredible thing.
I think this game is just beautiful. It's gorgeous. There's no questioning that, but I have never been able to get over the bash the leader problem that it has. I know that the expansion fixes that. All I'm saying is I have not played it enough with the expansion for this to be on my list of one of my favorite troops on a map games.
It's a good warning. I think that if anyone in your game group has ever said the word king-making out loud in a whiny voice, has ever thought of the word king-making in their head in a whiny voice, they should not participate in Inish because they will whine.
Well, it really, really affects the pacing of the game. I feel like most of my games of this have been, okay, it's like exhausting. Like, okay, well now Kellen's in the lead. Let's kill him. Okay, well now Neilan's in the lead. Let's go after him. Okay, well now, and it just like bounces around in this way that does not feel satisfying to me. Again, I'm happy that there's a solution to this and I want to play more of it now that there is, but I just haven't had any really good experiences with it.
For what it's worth, Christina, I agree with you 100% on this. Like, without the expansion, Inish is like, perhaps
unplayable.
Too good.
Perhaps like a bottom 200 game for me. Like it's a game.
Oh my god!
Honestly, it's a game.
I don't even think
I hate that bash the leader thing. I honestly hate that bash the leader thing. Maybe I haven't played it enough to know better. Honestly, because that's a completely fair criticism. Because I've only played it like 4 or 5 times, but like there may be some way around it that I have not experienced or learned. But every game I've played of Inish without the expansion has been a terrible experience. Period.
Same.
I will say one thing in response to that, Mark, which is I do think that there are a lot of built-in things that become apparent the more you play Inish, which actually do a good job of accelerating the game towards a conclusion. The deed tokens, the way that you're rapidly expanding on multiple goals so that often a win is, well, you can stop me on this goal, but you're not also going to be able to stop me on this goal. And like finding the ways to capitalize on that without someone being able to bash you down is, I think, a lot of what Inish is all about.
And Mark, just in case Neilan's diplomatic answer didn't work,
yep,
I will answer you in kind. Get the deed tokens, you idiot.
I would just say that every single time I've played Inish without the expansion has been terrible. Terrible. Honestly, has been terrible.
I don't even think the expansion changes that
me too.
much.
I know. It's the funny part. I get it. The length. I agree with you. I think that Neilan is right, too, that the deed tokens become actually like the biggest thing that you're supposed to be doing at the beginning of the game.
To the point that actually, when I teach it to people, I actually almost say up front now, like, let me tell you why D tokens are good and why you should be super aware of how good they are. Because I do think it actually drastically changes the game when people are like getting a lot of D tokens.
And on the pro side, the thing that's difficult is that every part of the game seems like a part that I would like. It's like, to me, a situation where, again, not talking about the expansion, but the base game feels like the whole is much less than the sum of its parts. Like every part of it seems awesome. I love every part of it. Like the whole thing about when you battle as long as both people want to fight, and the fact that there's only a few cards that you have to understand, and then you have like a very firm grasp of the game. I think it's awesome. It's just, it does not coalesce for me at all without the expansion.
So that was two lovely voices speaking about a lovely game, Inish, and two pretenders, the number 7 best board game of all time, Inish.
My 7th favorite board game of all time, this is a Neilan move here, sort of 2 games. This is Brass, so this is Lancashire and Birmingham. But if I had to pick one, and this is my olive branch to Kellen side of things, I will pick one. I'll pick Lancashire, which is the original version.
The OG.
That's right. Although both of these games were recently redone by Roxley in unbelievably beautiful versions, not only aesthetically beautiful in terms of the board art and everything, but also with the iron clay heavy chips. I played this game before Neilan, but even back then, before Neilan even played it, I saw him rolling them around in his fingers. So even before he got into Brass, he was into the tactile nature of the chips. Anyhow, Brass is a economic game by Martin Wallace with, I will say, the rule set is a little bit on the fiddly side. It's not as straightforward a rule set as I love. Like games to me that are like the upper echelon are games that have a very clean rule set. There's a little bit of fiddliness with Brass, but I think it's more than overcome by the interesting and unique parts of Brass. And for me, the main thing is the fact that you have a sort of cooperative, sort of cutthroat nature to the game of Brass. You're both cutting people off from locations that they want and from industries that they want to succeed in. You're taking over areas that people want, and so there's the very brutal competition for that. But also, you are producing goods that you want other players to use, because once they use your goods, the buildings quote-unquote activate and you'll get the points that are associated with them. And it's just that dual nature of Brass that I think you don't really find very often in economic games. I think most good economic games have that sort of thing where you want to be appealing to other players, but Brass does it in a way, almost like a Euro way. It's like an economic game where you're appealing to other players, but it's not a stock market sort of game. It's done in this Euro aspect where you see things happen in the board, that it just all coalesces in a really wonderful way. And you know what it's got? It's got 2 phases. It's got 2 distinct phases, and you know how much I love those. So I give the edge to Lancashire because it's a little tougher than Birmingham. Birmingham is a little bit looser, but they're both just great games, and Brass is a fantastic design. Martin Wallace, whenever he makes a game, it may not be a game I even like, but I think he always has unique spins on his designs, and Brass, I think, is his best by a mile. So my 7th favorite game of all time is the Brass series, but if I had to pick one, it's Brass Lancashire.
I've only played Birmingham, and it was earlier on my list, so I guess this is technically a double crossover, but you do make me want to play Lancashire. It sounds like I do need to play the OG to get like a full appreciation of Brass, but Birmingham, and especially the new Roxley productions, like you said, are phenomenal. Beautiful games.
I have not played, but if I had to make a list of all the games that I expect I will love, I think Brass is probably in the 1 or 2 slot. The combination of Euro plus economic, I just really want to try this one.
Yeah, I think you will like it. I don't know if it's top 10 material for you, but I do think you would like it a lot.
I just need to get invited. Apparently Neilan was playing Blood Rage with his favorite friends and not I.
My seventh favorite board game of all time is Tzolk'in, the Mayan calendar. This is another Tzolk'in game, so as we mentioned earlier, just be forewarned if you're planning on seeking this out. This is a game that I slipped down my list a little bit based on some plays earlier in the year, where I kind of started to see maybe the extent of the system. I've not played extensively with the expansion, so bear that in mind. I've heard it's only an improvement on the original. Tzolk'in is a game that is ostensibly a worker placement game, but it's one of the more novel worker placement mechanisms I've seen, where the board has literal plastic gears on it. And as you place a worker onto one of those gears, you are able in a future turn to remove that worker to take the action on the spot that it corresponds to, or any action behind it. But those gears are advancing every single turn. So when you place a worker on the gear, it is with the intent of pulling it off in a future turn once that has advanced to the correct position. So there is a huge amount of forward planning that you require in order to do well at Tzolk'in, because you can never place and pull a worker on the same turn. So there's always this question in your head of, okay, I'm going to place this now, pull it off 3 turns from now, place one here on the next turn so that I could also pull it off. You're doing all of these calculations in your head as you're looking as to how the gears are going to advance and how future turns are going to play out. It is marrying that with your standard move along tracks, collect food, feed your workers style of worker placement, but with a bunch of different ways to score. It's a really novel thing. It's just a cool gimmick that is more than just a gimmick. It is a really phenomenal mechanism that I don't think could work as well without the gear gimmick. That is Tzolk'in, the Maya calendar.
My 6th favorite game of all time is higher up on somebody else's list. So for now, I'll just go grab a bottle of champagne while I wait.
My 6th favorite board game of all time is higher on someone else's list, so we'll get there when we get there, but it will certainly be Grande.
My 6th favorite game of all time has risen from 10 last year. This is The Estates. The Estates is a really simple, really tough, really short economic game. It's got all the brutality of a heavy economic game that I love, but in a very, very small package. And it's also a unique heavy economic game because you're building structures. You don't have like a bunch of bills, you don't have a bunch of stocks or anything. All you do, you're building these little towers. The crux of The Estates is its auction. What you're doing for most of the game is auctioning pieces either of your own or of your opponent's, and auctioning the right to place them on the board. So when it's your turn, you can select, if it's available, one of your own building blocks to auction or an opponent's. And the reason you want to win your opponent's is because whoever wins the auction is the person who places the building block on the board. And the interesting thing is that at the end of the game, you will have rows of buildings, and any row of building that is incomplete scores negative points. So it is possible none of the rows of buildings will be completed, and therefore everybody will score potentially negative points. Another thing that I love about this game is that it's a closed economy. There is no money coming into the system. The only way that money is coming or going from the system is when it leaves the system, when you, on your turn, choose to embezzle funds. So you can voluntarily take money out of the system, but reserve it for your score at the end of the game. It is a game where every single turn, you are just like sweating it. It only lasts about an hour. The games are usually about an hour long, but it's a game that gets my blood pumping perhaps more than any other game. Every time it comes back around to me, I'm like trying to figure out, should this be a turn where I am putting something up for auction in order to make money? And I'm keeping an eye on my opponent's stacks of money, because the amount of money you have is not an open information in the game. The only way you know how much money everybody has is by looking at their stacks of cash. And that's just a really visceral thing. Like, I'm trying to figure out, is Kellen a player in this auction coming up? The only way I can tell is A, his board position, but also how fat his stack is.
Fat stacks of cash.
That's right. For me, like, the whole thing about Estates is that concentrated economic tension. It's distilled into this really, really concentrated form where, I mean, when I think of my games of the estate, honestly, my memory is not of a board state or of like my position or of how much money I had. It's of my heart pounding in my chest. It's of like being really, really tense about, do I have enough money to make it to the end of this game, and figuring out where I stand.
That sounds amazing. Invite us to your next game of the Estates.
Absolutely.
Noi Hamadi. I have two things to say about the estates. It used to be called Noi Hamadi. Or New Hamat. Who could say? One, Mark loves games with closed economies because within 20 minutes of the game starting, he has all of the money. And so we maybe should just start the game with him having all the money. And two, there has never been a board game before and after that I think that some of my lack of enjoyment of comes from my terribleness at the game. You know, a lot of people talk a lot about, oh, I won the game, so maybe I'm biased and that's why I like it. I do not feel like I'm one of those people at all, but somehow my performance in the estates is always so bad that I have a feeling that if I was even 20% better, that this would rise dramatically in the rankings, but I can't figure out how to do anything in this game except give Mark my money. And so that's where I'm at with the estates, which is clearly like a classic design that has sort of become battle-tested.
So that is the estates, my sixth favorite game of all time.
My sixth favorite game of all time has the best board game title of all time. This is probably the highest riser for me this episode. It goes from 12 into my top 10 and number 6. This is Sidereal Confluence, Trading and Negotiation in the Elysian Quadrant. Sidereal Confluence at its core is a cube conversion Eurogame, which is not the most exciting way to start off the description of any game as a cube converter, but I think that what Sidereal Confluence does with that basic fabric is phenomenal. It turns it into a game with extremely asymmetric powers, where the way you're able to manipulate the resources in the game is fundamentally different from everyone else at the table. It turns it into a game where the crux of the game, the core of the game, is you using your unique power to best facilitate trading with other people at the table in order to acquire the resources you need and provide the resources that other people need. Despite being a negotiation game, it is a fairly friendly game. You're not allowed to deceive people in the game. Every promise has to be delivered on as per the rules of the game. And it's a game where if you are helping other people, you are ultimately helping yourself by boosting the economy at the table. It almost feels, and it's not in any way a cooperative game, but it almost feels like there is a required amount of cooperation with the people that you're best able to fit with in order to boost yourself.
It doesn't seem like Kellen or I would be capable of doing any of those things. You have to fulfill your promises? What?
I think that's one of the things that is actually, in some ways, the most cool about it. Because what that ultimately ends up meaning is that all trades feel grounded. They all feel honest in a way. And I think a lot of that is helped by the fact that the game literally gives you a guide to say, this is worth this much. Like a ship is probably worth equal to this sort of cube, which is equal to this sort of cube, which means that you never feel like you're getting shafted in a trade. You can just always look at that and be like, well, I think this would be more fair, but I'm willing to give you this in case of this. It also gives you a lot of freedom in what you can trade. Like some of your converters can be given to other players temporarily. You can give ships, which are used for blind bidding, because part of what you're doing is acquiring new converters through research or acquiring new colonies, which generate resources. And I can't stress enough like how different every game of this feels because of how unique each of these factions is. It's a game that is just, this is going to sound crazy, but up to 11 people playing simultaneously and little deals going off in different corners. And you might not even talk to someone who's on the opposite end of the table in the game. And that's okay, because until you find that you're connecting on something that they specifically you need from each other, that might just not happen. So it is a game that sort of almost, despite it being a weird, eclectic Euro cube conversion game, that gets out of the way a little bit once the negotiation starts and the trading starts and you're just jostling with other people to get the things you need before they get taken by other players. I think there's a huge factor of this being a game that I have missed so much in COVID land because it feels almost impossible to have played this year. It's also not a game that could easily translate online at all, I don't think. So with all that in mind, and in light of a new version which kind of finally does away with almost the embarrassing graphic design of the original, I think Sidereal Confluence is a game that is a wholly unique experience and one that you should absolutely seek out if anything I've just described sounds appealing, because it will probably be so different from anything else you've played before.
It's crazy to me that a part of the game is your mental willpower, you know, because when you get near the end of the game, you're like physically tired of all the talking and negotiating and trading that you can lose just because another round starts and you're just like, oh my God, I have to keep talking to these people. And so if you don't participate, you won't win because you have to be continually making those trades.
That is a good point, Kellen. And actually, one thing that I might even want to say is a little bit of a caveat is that this is quite specific in the sort of gamer that wants playing it. If you're going to isolate by yourself and be sort of content with keeping in your corner, you're not going to do well at Sidereal Confluence. It requires you to put yourself out there a little bit. And I know that that's not necessarily appealing to all gamers, but if you get past that barrier, it's so rewarding.
And also, it's a game where most people, for most trades, will walk away happy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I've never felt, except with some cases with Mark, especially, but it's always Mark. You often feel like you're getting the bad end of a deal with Mark. But that said, in most cases of Sidereal Confluence, Mark's exactly right in that you mostly feel like you both elevated a little bit at the end of a trade.
I think you've illustrated for me why I don't like Sidereal Confluence, and that is that like the game tells you the relative value of all resources, and then ultimately your faction differentiation actually helps you evaluate whether white or blue or dark gray is better for you or I. So the game sort of like railroads you into saying this is a positive trade for both of you, even though it isn't. And so it's like everything is good. Everything feels good, but someone is getting got, and that someone is inversely proportional to who understands how all the races work together. And so fundamentally the game is about understanding like a complex ecosystem of like 7 alien races that I don't give a shit about.
I think there is some truth to that, and I think that those are the rails on the system a little bit. But the one thing I will always say is that Mark always wins this game, despite what faction he plays. So there is the element of trading and negotiation cannot be understated.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
That is Sidereal Confluence, Trading and Negotiation in the Elysian Quadrant, my number 6 game.
My number 5 game is higher up on someone else's list, so at least I know that I'm not all alone on an island.
I guess it's probably worth mentioning now as a caveat that Christina and I live together. We are partners. Our board game collection is the same board game collection, so you know a lot of the crossover you are seeing and hearing is the natural course of us playing board games together over the last, I don't know, how many years?
I don't know, like 6 or 7.
Yeah.
I can't do the math.
My 5th favorite board game of all time is higher up on someone else's list. I think my time is up, so we will get there when we get there.
There is no greater sign that 2020 was the year of the Friese for me than the fact that my number 5 favorite game of all time is brand new to my list, and it is Friedman Friese's Fresh Fish.
Wow.
I just spoke about another auction game, The Estates. Fresh Fish is another auction game. I think what gives Fresh Fish the edge to me over The Estates is it's not as brutal, but it's still pretty brutal. You start the game with $15, and that's all you're going to get. This is another closed economy where money is just going out.
There it is.
When it's just going out of the system. What I love about this game is that you have 2 things you can do on your turn. Place a reserve token on a spot that you can reserve to build something on, or start an auction. And when auctions happen, stalls are placed on the board, and the goal of the game is to get the 4 stereotypical fair foods. So you're at a fair, you're trying to get the foods as close to the stalls as possible because they are the freshest that way. And as we all know, the 4 things that you get from fairs are soda, cheese, fish, and
gummy bears.
Funnel cake.
No.
Fried turkey legs.
No.
Fried Oreos.
Green eggs and ham.
But the actual answer is ice cream.
Bread.
Oh, ice cream, of course.
Ice cream. So yeah.
Oh,
fish.
ice cream, of course. That's a Homestar Runner thing. And never mind. It's Istanbul, of course. Never mind.
You're trying to build your stalls next to the sources of these goods. And so you're placing the reservation tokens to plant your flag to say, I'm going to build my stall here because it's super close to the ice cream and I want to get fresh ice cream. But once a certain number of things are built in a section, all the reservation tokens are kicked out and back to the players, and all those reservation tokens that you had that you were counting on to build your stalls now become paved over with roads. And that's the thing that I love about Fresh Fish is like you can place a reservation marker and hope to really quickly snag the stall you want, but if you wait too long, in all likelihood, somebody else is going to build in that parcel of space, and you're just going to lose your reservation token, and you're just going to get paved over by roads. And so you can think that you're right there and you're primed for a great spot, and then all of a sudden that marker gets kicked and you've got nothing now. You've gone from being in prime real estate to having nada. I love the swing of that. And these are all based on blind bidding. So, when it comes time to making that decision, it's not like you could say, okay, I'm going to bid one more than the highest bid. I'm just going to make sure that I bid one more. No, you're doing a blind bid. And if you're wrong about what your intuition says is the right amount to bid, you're going to get got big time. It's got a really simple rule set. Love everything about it. 2020 Year of the Friesa, my number 5 game of all time. New to the list, Fresh Fish.
This is a double crossover. This was on my list as well. And it really is one of those games that is so painful, but equally satisfying.
Right.
It's just like, there's nothing like the satisfaction of seeing that happen to Kellen. And there's nothing more painful than when it happens to you. And it's just, like you said, Mark, just that swing is just like, oh, it's so good.
Yep.
If it had a theme that I could palette, maybe.
You don't like fairs?
You don't like fish?
Don't like ice cream?
Fresh fish? It's just like, why would you theme your game that, of all the things you could
Oh, you know what? Let's do Trading in the Mediterranean, Kellen. Great. Perfect. Let's just do that. God.
Excuse me, sir.
Live a little.
Live a little.
It's
Go
like-
to the fair. Get some funnel cake and ice cream. Eat some fish.
It's like when it's intentionally like gross on purpose. No good.
I don't
fresh
think.
fish.
I don't think this is intentionally.
I don't think
gross in
fish
any
is not
world.
universally reviled.
Can we
I'm not sure
Take
what.
this to Japan. I don't know, something.
My 5th favorite game of all time is higher up on someone else's list, so we'll come back to it at a later time. And I just said one of the words in the title, so we'll have to skip for now.
All right. My 4th favorite game of all time, Kellen's 6th favorite game of all time, and Mark's 10th favorite game of all time is the best pure area control game of all time. Wow, I said time a lot there. This game is El Grande Big Box.
Top 10 triple crossover.
Where are you at, Neilan?
El Grande, I'm sorry to say, slipped off my list this year.
Oh,
my goodness. All right, well, let's tell Neilan why he's wrong. Let's remind him by talking about how good this is. So every round in El Grande, you're bidding for turn order and basically the chance to select the best action card. And those action cards allow you to influence the regions on the board and the amount of troops that you're bringing out. Every single round, it is a super tough decision because you have to balance between the amount of guys that you want to bring out and how early you go in the turn order, which determines which action card you choose, which then determines what you're actually able to do on that turn. This game is just so fast moving. You're constantly moving troops around the map. There is a king that cannot be touched. When the king is in the region, nobody can go in there. Some of the action cards allow you to move the king so that you can protect your region and keep people from going in so that you hold the majority there as soon as scoring happens. Scoring happens a lot. There is also a Castillo in El Grande, which is one of the best parts, and some people disagree, but I think it's one of the best parts. You are able to drop your troops into a Castillo. It's not private. You have to tell everybody how many you're dropping, but then they have to remember, and you also have to remember, because not only are you trying to win the majority, have the most cubes inside the Castillo, but everyone is simultaneously and secretly deciding where they want those troops from the Castillo to go. So before the scoring happens, those cubes from the Castillo will be placed in whichever region each player decides. And so it's such a tense moment. Every time this happens, you're sitting there like going back and forth, like, do I put them in that region or this region? I think Kellen's probably going to go in that one. I already have majority there. I don't want to lose it if Kellen goes there. I think Kellen put 4 in, but maybe he put 6. And it is just like this maddening moment, but it's so good.
What I love about El Grande is that it's both simple and straightforward, but it's got like these cool twists on it. The twists come from the cards. So, the gameplay of El Grande is really straightforward. It's like when it's your turn, you are going to select a card that tells you where in turn order you go. You can act early, but that's going to give you less people to place on the map. Or you can choose to go late and place a lot of troops on the map. So there's that consideration, but that's straightforward. And also where you place them is straightforward because you can only place them around the king's area. You can't place them in the king's area, but you can place around the king's area. So it's all very, very simple and straightforward, but also very fun. Like that determination is a big thing to it because there's a timing of do I want to go first or last or whatever. But where the twist comes in are the cards. The cards that you're drafting every round give you powers and abilities that are rule bending or rule breaking. And that's like the twist on it that makes it go from like what could be sort of seen as a staid, abstract game to something much more interesting. I think that's where El Grande separates. It has both the very simple rule set, very straightforward gameplay, but then the cards inject this like spin factor that makes it something elevated.
I think of Scythe as a sheep in wolf's clothing, and El Grande is the quintessential wolf in sheep's clothing. I've had tremendous success setting up El Grande and saying, hello, fellow Eurogamers. Behold my beige map. Behold my meeples. Sit down, play a Eurogame, good friend.
There's a lot of tricking going on in this episode.
And boom, suddenly we're knifing each other and we're playing El Grande, and it's just mean and vicious and straightforward. I love El Grande because I don't get to do everything I want. I can only do the thing I want the most. A philosophy by which I try to live my real life. I love there's 7 battlefields. There's 7 things that you want to do, and you can't do them all. You must choose. There's just enough control on this chaos to make it flow in such a way that it isn't the best, most strategic Eurofied game. You can lose the game through less fault of your own. That has happened to me, but the game moves quickly. It's in, it's out. It crosses the aisle in being something that Eurogamers are willing to play, but it's like quite vicious. It's hard to describe how good El Grande is. Almost everything that has come after is compared directly to. Mark said something super interesting on one of the top 50 episodes. It gets to the point. And the point of an area control game, El Grande gets to the point. It doesn't waste any of your time doing other things.
Yeah, and I think that is a good point. We always compare other things to El Grande. Like, this is good, but it's not better than like games that try to improve on systems that El Grande has already perfected, I think it would take like 10 minutes to teach this game because of how straightforward it is.
Right, yeah.
And it just packs in, and once again, I'm just going to throw that word experience out there. It just packs in a really, really interesting and fun experience every single time you pull it out.
Yeah, I don't want my silence and it not being on my list to sort of be seen as disagreement here. El Grande was on my list last year, and for whatever reason...
Bad taste.
I couldn't drum up the enthusiasm. Yeah, maybe. I couldn't drum up the enthusiasm to have it on my list this year. In my mind, it's a lot of what I talk about when I talk about Inish, which is to say that the rule set is simple enough that what you're left with is just playing and manipulating the pieces of the people at the table. Like Mark said so perfectly, it gets out of the way and lets you play the game.
That's right. And that is my number 4, Kellen's number 6, and Mark's number 10. Best game of all time.
My 4th favorite board game of all time and Christina's 6th favorite board game of all time is Trois. A Euro game for Eurogamers and the rest of us. I love Euro games. Trois.
It's in the Champagne region of France, by the way.
Oh, goody. Trois strikes me as the game where there are combos there, and you get to look at those combos and go, man, wouldn't it be cool if I got to use those combos? And you almost never get to use those combos. You're rolling dice. You're saying, wow, these red dice can really combo with these red cards, and I really want to do that combo. But wait, I've got to combat the black dice at the start of the round, so now I'm losing some of my dice. But wait, if we don't stop the events at the bottom of the board, it's just going to get worse next turn. But wait, Christina just bought my other red dice, and now I've got none before my turn even starts. And your dreams of a red combo chain that's going to connect the red 1 card to the red 2 card to the red 3 card are dashed. But you have a lot of money, but you have nothing to do with the money.
But when the combos do work, it is a thing of complete and utter beauty. It is so satisfying. I have had so many... Maybe I'm just better at this game than Kellen because I feel like my combos work out a lot. But
Great.
When the turn order is right, because turn order can really screw you in this game. I love looking at the upcoming turn order and thinking, okay, I'm going to set myself up for when I'm first player, because then I will get to use all of the dice that I have. I'm going to be able to buy Kellen 6 red. You just set things up, but it's also super, super tactical because you don't know what other cards are going to be coming up. In the first round, you're only seeing 1/3 of the cards that will even be coming out for the whole game. And these cards are so swingy. They have such big powers and the potential for such big combos that really changes the way you're planning. And so you can kind of go into it and plan what you think you want to do, but you have to be willing and ready to pivot when the moment calls for it. I go into every single game of Troyes so excited because I don't know what cards are going to come up. I just think this game is endlessly replayable because of that. You don't know what event cards are going to come up. You don't know what action cards are going to come up. All of that combined with the insane amount of player interaction just makes it way more tactical, like I was saying, than other Euro games.
There's something innately satisfying about the structure of a card is divided by 2 red. So that means that for every 2 red that you inject into that card, you're going to get $3. But you can buy up to 2 other dice. You can actually inject up to 18 red into that one card. And then you think, wait a minute, 18 divided by 2 is 9, and that means I'm going to get 9 times whatever that power is. I can trigger that 9 times, and all I have to do is have 3 6 reds, and Mark's got one, and Neilan's got one, so I just have to pay them and take their dice. So you're running all of these little calculations in your mind and trying to maximize what you could do on a turn. But you're like, but I have to pay him, and I have to pay her. Is that worth it? Is this worth it? What is going to score me the most points? There are also, one of my favorite mechanisms, hidden victory conditions, where you have to be paying attention to what other people are going for, because everyone has one of those scoring conditions, and you will score based on how well you fare at a condition that you're not aware of. But you are aware of all the conditions and say, why is Neilan stacking the money? It's not because he likes playing with it, it's because it's the hidden victory condition. So there's feints within feints where you might be trying to assume like you're going to do something, but you aren't. Troyes defies some level of description. It is a classic Euro game that adds on quite a bit of unique systems that you don't see in other places that could feel out of place. I think the biggest pro tip I always give to everyone when they play is like, don't think about your own dice as your own dice. Because especially on a round where you don't start the round, you will not have half of the dice before it gets to your turn. It's this weird shared communal pool of dice that you are buying from each other in such a fascinating way.
I think I'm, again, unfortunately, the only person stopping this from being a quadruple crossover. Troyes is, I played it for the first time this year, and it is so close. Again, I know this is a cliche to say, but it is hovering below the bottom of my list. It is an excellent game, and I think that the tactical nature of it, where you're very constantly reacting to the changed board state based on what dice other people are purchasing on their turns, is everything about it. It's a game where you cannot reliably, in a good way, reliably say like, oh, I'm definitely going to be able to do this, this, and this, and this when you look at the dice pool at the start of a round, because that dice pool is going to change drastically and not always in your favor. And setting yourself up to best be able to pivot on what dice become available is the entirety of that game, and it's all the better for it.
And that is my 4th favorite board game of all time, and Christina's 6th, Troyes.
My 4th favorite game of all time has dropped a spot. This was 3 last year, but other people have had it on the list. This is Hansa Teutonica. Hansa Teutonica is a game that I stayed away from for a couple of years because I just thought, there are plain-looking games, and Hansa Teutonica is like way high on that list. It is a drab-looking Euro, and I didn't think that there was probably going to be very much to it, but after playing it, how wrong I was. Hansa Teutonica is a really dynamic game of route building, but the thing I love the most about it is that, like in all my favorite games, you are trying to get in other people's way. You're trying to horn in on their strategies. You're trying to block them. You're trying to cut them off, which is an aspect of games that I love. But what Hansa Teutonica does is it both rewards you for getting in somebody's way and also rewards them for pushing you out of the way. So the most obvious reward for somebody pushing you out of the way is they've cleared you out of the way. It's not a game where you can sit somewhere and be an impassable object where now somebody has to reconfigure their strategy from the baseline. No, they can push you out of the way. However, when they push you out of the way, you get the bonus of placing more troops on the map. So it's a situation where, yes, you want to block somebody, and not only are you making their turn more costly, but you're also getting a benefit of, yeah, you'll bump me, but now I get to have more influence on the board. And I just love that. It's a great balancing of being in the way, but not being so in the way that you ruin somebody else's plan, but you also get a very significant benefit for being an obstruction to somebody else's plan. So it walks a tightrope in a way that I think is fantastic. And also, it's a game where it doesn't have like 1,000 different powers, but there are a couple different things you can do, different powers that you can make stronger during the course of the game that are just wonderful. Everything just flows together wonderfully. I think it's such a brilliant design, and I'm so happy that it's re-released in its big box version this year. Just a fantastic design, fantastic game. My number 4 favorite game of all time is Hansa Teutonica.
If I'm not mistaken, this is quadruple crossover, right?
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Oh.
This is the first quadruple crossover.
Wow.
Yeah, this is great. When I think of a game that Mark would always have and always be willing to play, I would probably think Hansa Teutonica.
Yeah, for sure.
There's another game that we'll get to that he pretends to like, but this is the one for him.
You know him better than he knows himself.
That's right, I always have.
It's funny because like when Mark was talking about the estates, I almost said the same thing of like, this is the most Mark game I can think of. But then you have to be like, well, except for that other game that he always talks about. My 4th favorite game of all time is Gloomhaven. This is a cooperative campaign-based dungeon crawler. The premise of a dungeon crawler game is that you play as a party of adventurers, so each player controlling a hero. You're moving through a sort of dungeon-like environment, killing enemies, working towards a specific goal as dictated by the scenario you're playing. I think the thing that Gloomhaven does specifically so well is twofold. It marries this with a very expansive story-driven campaign where they have a huge number of scenarios that are threaded together through this multi-branching campaign where choices you make between the scenarios are going to determine the overall path of your story. It also has a very cool card-based system for action selection where on your turn you're going to pick 2 cards in your bespoke deck of cards. Each character class has a deck that is specific to them of about around 10 cards depending on the class. You pick 2 of them and you choose an action from the top of one card and the top of the other card, and then you execute those actions in order of the initiative on those cards. The reason that this works so well is each of those decks of cards is so closely tied to the class in a way that just feels so very thematic. They're not just like subtle variations of attack this creature or move here. They feel like each class has a very specific mechanism built into the way it utilizes cards. One class, for example, is designed to burn through its deck very quickly, then reacquire those cards and sort of burn through it again. Another class is designed to create an element and use those in very specific times in order to rapidly kill people as they sort of move around the map invisibly. So there are just very cool differences in the way that each of these decks is constructed to make the classes feel extremely different. A lot of this also extends to the enemies in the game. They each have a different, unique flavor to them in the way that they execute on their card patterns. You start to feel like you understand the patterns of the way that each of the classes work, the way that each of the enemies connect together. You see an enemy type come up and you're just like, oh my god, I remember how we have to sort of now manipulate our behavior to deal with this. It's such a vast game. It's kind of hard to cover everything that is so good about Gloomhaven. I will say that if you have any affinity at all for video game role-playing game systems, or something that's adjacent to a Dungeons & Dragons without quite being a tabletop RPG, which to be clear is a genre I'm not a huge fan of, I think you owe Gloomhaven a try, especially considering they have a new version that came out this year, which I have not explicitly played, but is designed to ease people into what is quite a complex rule set that is called Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion.
Frosthaven.
Not Frosthaven.
Moonhaven.
Not Moonhaven. Gloomhaven Jaws of...
D&D Haven.
Gloomhaven Jaws of the...
Pathfinder Haven.
Gloomhaven... Just keep doing this. Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion is a version of the game that's reduced in price, reduced in rule set, and designed to ease you into the experience. And almost certainly the best starting point for something like this. I played like 50... scenarios of this. We've still not finished our campaign. We are very rapidly approaching the end. And man, Gloomhaven is incredible. Gloomhaven is almost like the game that I wanted a lot of games growing up to be, stuff like Hero Quest actually realized in a very modern feeling, excellent board game.
I think that's a perfect description. It's like that game that's, like you said, like Hero Quest, like the game that you envisioned as a kid being like the ultimate game. And it is. It's fantastic for that. After playing this, I realized that these like legacy campaign games aren't for me. But I think if they were, I think you can do better than Gloomhaven. The card system is just fantastic. The scope of it and the breadth of it is just unbelievable. If this is a type of game you're looking for, if you want to get into this legacy, long campaign sort of game, I don't know how you do better than Gloomhaven.
Absolutely.
Hey, Neilan.
Yeah.
I have a question for you.
Brother.
Yeah.
Is this just Gloomhaven, or does this include the $100 box add-on that you need to make the game work?
That is a fair point. I think that setup and teardown of Gloomhaven is a beast. I think it is a fair bit more fiddly than it could be. And I don't know how much of this gets resolved in Jaws of the Lion and how much of this will get resolved in Frosthaven. But I do think that is... To me, it's just part and parcel of the... I don't want to say part of the experience, because I do think that stuff could be better, but it doesn't feel like it's a significant barrier to the experience, to me at least. Because, the way that I've done Gloomhaven in the past is I'll set it up before everyone arrives and then tear it down after they've left. So, it's the beast that I'm willing to bear for the sake of the experience.
For your art.
Exactly. That is Gloomhaven, my fourth favorite game of all time.
My third favorite game of all time... And
my third favorite game of all time
is a Sandy Peterson game.
Oh my God.
Very loud.
Wow, that hurt.
I'm sorry.
This is our second quadruple crossover.
Yeah.
Quadruple crossover. This is Cthulhu Wars. As you probably know, if you've listened to this podcast, Cthulhu Wars is a troops on a map game, and it is the pinnacle of troops on a map games. This is our collective favorite. Is this also your guys' favorite?
Yeah.
I think so.
All right. So this is the Board Game Barrage #1 troops on a map game of all time. Cthulhu Wars is the best because it takes all of the systems that we collectively love about troops on a map games, and it fine-tunes them to this perfect degree.
In many ways, I think it'd be disrespectful not to literally say it owes a lot of its success to Chaos in the Old World and Eric Lang's sort of spiritual predecessor. This is a game where you are planning out your moves on a turn in a Euro-like fashion because you have a limited amount of power, you have everything that you want to do, and everything is about tempo. Because if I use 1 power now to move a troop, I need to be able to build a gate, and that's going to cost me 3 power, and I got to be ready for that. But if Neilan invades me in the north, that's going to be a problem. And you don't want everyone to know what you're doing, so you're trying to hide where you might be going or what you might be interested in doing. You combine that tight, amazing system with wildly asymmetric player powers where, you hand someone a box at the beginning of the game and you say, here's your powers, and you've got 6 unique powers and 6 different objectives to unlock those powers, and you're allowed to do that in any order. So you're sort of having to figure out your build, and there's the yellow sign faction that doesn't even really care about what's going on. It's just sort of roaming the map trying to desecrate and saying, no, don't worry about me. Like, I'm not here to fight. I'm just here to desecrate, and you have to stop them. You've got Cthulhu hiding in the water and using the water to his advantage. Every faction that you add into this game injects so much flavor and unique abilities and things to consider. And I think it's very, very important to say that I hate Cthulhu. I don't care about Cthulhu. I'm tired of Mr. Cthulhu. I'm tired of Mr. Cthulhu's friends. I don't care. I don't want them. Go away. This game works in spite of that. It is a triumph of a game that should not work and yet somehow does. I think we've seen the release of Cthulhu Wars Duel this year, a 2-player standee version of the game that many people are just now receiving and enjoying. So that's a low-cost way to try out Cthulhu Wars. Cthulhu Wars is a game of excess. It is a game that takes up the most space in my closet. There are maps, there are neutral factions, there are upgraded gates. So I've got 3D gates. The plastic in this game, it's plastic on plastic on plastic. If you hear us rail against Kickstarter, it's a little like But what about Cthulhu Wars Onslaught 17, still shipping from China? Like, I have hundreds of dollars of Cthulhu Wars product still incoming. It goes against every ethos of what I think and respect about board games, and yet somehow it comes out the other side. And when we want to play a Troops on a Map game, we often go to Cthulhu Wars for that exploration, that tight gameplay. It is always a game where Christina is pacing around the room. It is so good.
It's a game that's so easy to be dismissive of if you look at it from the outside, right? Because it's a game of garishly colored plastic, gigantic figures, and throwing a metric ton of dice. But somehow the strength of the underlying mechanics, like the Uranus you described, Kellen, wins out ultimately. Christina, you sort of so perfectly mentioned that it fuses so many systems that we like from other games, like the conjunction of the action point system versus like the thing that you and I have spoken about a lot, the idea that you're building your faction towards a specific specialization. Because one of the things that, despite it being asymmetric, there are different ways to build your asymmetric faction, like in terms of what spell books you prioritize first. So you equally want to try out different routes with your faction, so much as like try the other factions, of which there are a billion.
Yeah, exactly. That is one thing that I love, is like, I think that I could play the same faction another 10 times before I even am ready to explore a new faction, because there's just so much there in every single faction.
I think it really belies how much we like it, that literally on the side of the box is an actual size, and then it shows a picture of one of the minis, and like, I vomit. Like, I wouldn't want to show that to people for fear of embarrassment. And yet Cthulhu Wars is as good as it is, would never leave my collection, and would be so excited, and am excited for, the Egyptian cat faction that is en route.
Oh, I thought you were going to say for the Pokemon retheme.
The Pokemon retheme. Sandy Peterson, get on that. Let's do it. I'm in it. That's great. It's about Pokemon. Let's do it. A Sandy Peterson game. The third best board game of all time.
Cthulhu Wars.
Cthulhu Wars. Let's have a Cthulhu War together.
So Marco Polo sort of slid down my list as a result of Marco Polo 2 coming out, which is, as I've said on this episode, I think is an inferior game, but just the fact that the second version came out, for whatever reason, hurt the original and superior original Marco Polo. The converse is true with my third favorite game of all time. This is Caylus 1303, which is the successor to Caylus, and I think is a unquestionable improvement to Caylus. Caylus 1303 also provided me this year with my favorite loss of all time. It is a story that we will not get into, but that is a notable aspect of the game. Caylus.
I can't even quite remember, sorry, but we'll talk.
I can remember.
Yes, I remember very vividly.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. Caylus, both the original and 1303, the main aspect of the game is that it's a worker placement game where you're placing workers along this road. And when you place a worker, you immediately have to pay for the right to place the worker. And if it triggers, you'll get the reward. You'll get whatever the space allows you. However, I say if it triggers because spots on the road may not trigger. And the thing that makes them trigger or not trigger is the provost, which is a piece that you can pay to move up and down the road, and everything in front of the provost will not trigger, and everything behind the provost will trigger. So if there's one part of Caylus, which is like the beauty of it, is the fact that you are fighting over which spots along the road are going to trigger and not trigger. And you're negotiating with your opponents to say, look, I need this spot to trigger. You have the spot right behind me. So we're basically in this together. Let's make sure you pay $1, I pay $1. Let's make sure that these spots trigger, and let's make sure that Neilan doesn't have enough money to ruin both of our plans. And it's that is the core of Caylus. It's the making sure that your spots trigger. Sure, you could place your worker on a spot way far back down the road and pretty much guarantee that your spot is going to go off. But the spots down the road are not as nice as the spots at the front of the road. And so there's that push and pull. Caylus did all that. So Caylus did that, and Caylus was my 13th favorite game of all time last year. I think 13th or 14th. The reason that Caylus 1303 is an improvement is because it does everything that you want from Caylus, but in 3/4 of the time. I think it shaves off at least a good 30 to 45 minutes. Also, it implements a lot of modern aspects of board gaming that weren't in the original Caylus. There are player powers. Now, when I heard there were player powers in Caylus 1303, I thought they might be a negative aspect. And to be fair, I don't think you need to play with them. I think they're a nice touch, but even playing without them is fine. But I think they're implemented well. Also, there is a variability in Caylus 1303 that I think was sorely lacking in Caylus. Caylus, because all the buildings you can build are available to you from the start of the game, it led to some very standard openings. There were like, maybe not openings is not the right word, but very clear courses of action. And Caylus 1303 injects some randomness, some variability in the setup that forces some more tactical gameplay, which I appreciate a great deal. Like most of my favorite games of all time, it's also got a very clear, simple rule set that I really, really appreciate. Caylus and Caylus 1303, both fantastic games, but for me, if you had to pick one, it would be the younger brother, Caylus 1303, my third favorite game of all time.
But Mark, does it get rid of the brown box with the grumpy old man on the front of the cover?
It does.
Oh my god, best game ever.
That's right. Yeah. So long, Caylus man.
My third favorite game of all time is Through the Ages, A New Story of Civilization. This is a civilization building game by Vlaada, the actual highest Vlaada game on my list. This is one of the earliest heavy strategy games I played when I was new to the hobby. And I'm pleased to say that not only does it still stand out as a very high point of all the board games I've played, but it's also been improved over twice in that time. A New Story of Civilization is a second edition of the original game that, to my mind, only improves on the original. I don't think there's anything I miss in the changes. The gist of the game is one of building your civilization, akin to games like the Civilization video game, or in fact the Civilization board game in which all of these things derive, by virtue of acquiring cards. There is a card row that is gradually moving over the course of the game, and you are spending your actions to acquire those cards in order to upgrade technologies, to get new buildings, to get new forms of government, to get new forms of military, because all of these things, getting buildings, getting government, getting military, are all competing with each other at all times in terms of what should dominate your priorities. You need to stay level with other players militarily in order to not be devastated by their attacks. You need to make sure you're not keeping up on science so that you're able to get new technologies. You need to make sure you're keeping up with your resources so that you can build new buildings. So you have all of these competing objectives that work in tandem, all while you're constantly evaluating the flow of cards through the game to find the right time to overspend for a card, or the right time to grab a card before someone else can take it. One of the reasons that this game has jumped up a little bit on my list this year is through the addition of the Leaders and Wonders expansion. It adds something to Through the Ages as a game, which I do think was actually maybe something that the game sorely was missing prior to this, which is card uncertainty. Whenever you play a game of Through the Ages prior to the expansion, the cards are the same in every game, and a large part of learning that game is just learning the availability of the cards, knowing that if you get this card now, a certain card is coming down the line. My preferred way to now play Through the Ages is to mix a random selection of 50% of the cards from the expansion and 50% of the cards from the original, shuffle them all together, and in that simple change alone, you don't know for sure what cards are coming up. It adds a little bit more of a tactical edge to it, where you cannot reliably say, when this card comes up later in the game, I will grab it, complete my perfect little combo, and capitalize on that. It makes it a little bit more about evaluating the row at all times, so what's best for you now, in a way that I think is actually a little bit more fair, especially when you're playing with mismatched experience levels. Through the Ages is absolutely a beast. It takes a lot of time, it has a lot of really heavy rules, but again, going back to ideal circumstances, if I was playing this with the time allotted out, with the people that I know would enjoy it, this is so close to being just one of the games I most want to play at any given point in time.
Neilan, let me ask you this.
Yes.
This is a real question this time.
I'm ready.
It is. Is Through the Ages the best, one of your favorite games that happens to be a Civ game, or is this the best Civ game that you found to this day? And do you understand
Yes,
what I'm
totally.
saying?
I think absolutely that this is the best game that happens to be a civilization game. It's a little bit of both to me. I want to clarify that, a little bit, because I do think it being a civilization game, and, if I'm understanding your question correctly, is there another civilization game that I haven't played that just suddenly fills this spot? No, I don't think so, because I actually think to some extent, like, Through the Ages does a good job of distinguishing itself from other civilization games by sort of not leaning into being a 4X game as well. It's not a game where you have a map at all. It's purely card tableau building. It almost feels entirely different from other civilization games while entirely capturing thematically the things I like about Civilization, the video game specifically, which was my entry point into Civilization games. Something that Vladikvatal and CGE do a lot is they definitely borrow from video games a little bit for their designs. And I do think Through the Ages absolutely looked at Civilization, the video game, and was like, let's recreate this in a card game form. But I do think it does it admirably by not replicating the game. It captures the feel of it. I think in answer to your question, you could re-theme this to not be Civilization themed, and in some ways it would be improved if you picked the right theme. One quick thing before I end out is that this game is a fantastic app, which would be how I would recommend learning it, absolutely, because it has a good tutorial. It guides you through all of the little rules grit that can make the game very daunting to learn in tabletop form. That is Through the Ages, A New Story of Civilization. My number 3 favorite game of all time.
All right. Listen up, you guys, because this is a quadruple crossover. I think this is the only quadruple crossover on the top 10, right? I think so.
I think so.
My second favorite game of all time. Kellen's 5th favorite game of all time. Mark's 9th favorite game of all time. And Neilan's, also Neilan's 5th favorite game of all time is Time's Up. Time's Up is a party game. It's a very, very, very party game in which there are 3, not 2 phases, but 3 phases of the game.
Almost there.
There are 3 phases of the game. In the first phase, there are teams, and each team is trying to get their other teammates to guess words, and they can basically do anything except for say any of the words in the title. In the second round, it's the same, except they are only allowed to say one word. And then in the third phase, it's the same titles, except they cannot say anything. So that sounds very simple. It might even sound like, how could a game of charades be the best quadruple crossover? But the reason and the thing that makes this game so good is that there are inside jokes that develop within a single game. So when you start the game, it's words you've never heard of. And one quick caveat to make is that we play with an app that our friend built, and it sources the titles from the internet. And it's like every title of every movie and every book and every video game and everything that you've never heard of. And so every single game you're going into, you've never heard of these words before. You've never heard of these titles. Some of them you have, but really you're just going into it and you're just acting out anything you can think of. And then in the second round, there might have been like Neilan did a weird like wiggle with his body, and it has nothing to do with Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. But because of that wiggle in the first round, all he has to do is wiggle in the second round, and it's Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. And you get it so fast, and it is just, the stress levels of this game are so high. We get so into it. You would think that we're playing a game of poker with like millions of dollars on the table. The amount of seriousness with which we take this game. This is the biggest experience game of all of the games on my top 50 list. We have jokes still to this day from 5 years ago that developed from games of Time's Up, or Celeb Party Game as we call it.
I think that's something that's worth, and you've already covered this a little bit, but it's almost hard to say that Time's Up specifically is the version of this you should play, because, it's practically a folk game. If we're describing this and you think you've played something similar to this, you probably have. There's stuff like monikers, there's stuff like Time's Up, there's stuff like apps. You could just do this with names written on slips of paper. It's an easy game to prep and play. Time's Up Title Recall specifically is the version that I think I would recommend as the entry point if you've never played played a version of this sort of game before.
I think that works so well for Board Game Barrage because we love party games, but many of them are just activities where it's okay to lose, and somehow in Time's Up, it is not okay to lose, and your night is ruined. So you have that party game vibe mixed with just the will to win, and there's no game that we try harder at than Time's Up Title Recall.
That is my second, Kellen and Neilan's fifth, and Mark's ninth favorite game of all time, Time's Up Title Recall.
My second favorite board game of all time, and Christina's fifth favorite board game of all time, is Archipelago. Before we get into Archipelago, just want to note that it does deal with themes of colonialism and occupying an island. There are characters and roles that you play within the game that actually have you sympathizing with the local people. But if that's not something you're interested in, I think we all get it. We understand. So that watch out before you seek this game out. Archipelago is one of the heaviest, fiddliest Euro games that I am willing to participate in because it truly is the friendship simulator for me. It is, what do all your friends want to do on the island? You have the technologies that Neilan is definitely going to be seeking out. He's going to be looking at what technology can he buy to upgrade and improve his civilization. You've got an economy with an import and export market that Mark is going to be dominating. He's going to be buying and selling, taking stuff from one market to the other market, making all the money. And then you have people who are just sitting in their corner of the island and farming and building up their resources. And then you have Kellen sailing across the archipelago and building a town hall in your land so that you can't even farm your own pineapples anymore because I'm now the governor of your land, and you can get that in each other's faces. This is a mishmash game. Everything I just said, but there could be a hidden traitor or a hidden person who is loyal to the island. This game defies all descriptions. You are constantly dealing with events and crises that everyone has to contribute to, or things go sideways. Everyone has to contribute to, or everyone loses resources. Archipelago has everyone have a hidden endgame scoring objective that is also tied to a hidden endgame trigger. So literally, the whole game is this looking around. Why is Mark doing that? Why is Neilan doing that? Who is doing what and why?
Winning a game of Archipelago feels unlike other wins. Like it almost feels like you got away with something. You know what I mean? Like you were able to successfully hide your win condition, or you were able to pretend like you weren't a traitor and then you sunk the whole game, or you were able to pretend like you were a traitor and you threatened to sink the whole game and you got other people to be scared that you were the traitor and they were working with you. There's just like so many little, very subtle things about this game that it's very hard to describe. Like it elevates the game to be a unique experience and to be a very big experience. Like Kellen said, it's very fighty. You're very in each other's business. It's frustrating. It's mean. You're second guessing what other people are doing. It's a tense game.
And then 2 hours into the game, there's a crisis and everyone has to contribute pineapples or everyone loses the game. And literally you all go around the table and you say, well, I'm not winning. So Neilan, give us your pineapple. And you have to have the stomach for the game to end, and no one has won the game. And so at any point when you no longer feel like you can win the game, you say, sorry, friends, I'm out. And that has to be okay with you. And that's not okay for most people who like heavy Euro games, of which this is one. It is the most niche product on my list, bar none. But if you like that emergent gameplay and that emergent storytelling of like, where the hell is this going? If you want to sit there with a checklist and go, okay, well, there are 7 exploration discs left, so no one has this hidden endgame condition, and you're questing, you're building out the island, you're farming, you're upgrading different things. It's got everything in it. It's got auctions. It's got blind bidding. It's crazy. And then at the end of all of that, it really comes down to these crises and forcing other people. It's basically deluding other people into thinking that they can win more than you, even though you know you can win, to allow the game to continue to win, like Christina said, to sneak and steal that victory. Archipelago is a game I would never turn down. It has so much depth to it. It's so fascinating. I am convinced that you could make the 1 hour version of Archipelago that I would like better than Archipelago. To this day, no one has made it. Please make it, please. And email us at boardgamebarrage@gmail.com because I would love to try it. Anytime someone says the word semi-co-op, my ears perk up. I get excited. You haven't done it better than Archipelago yet. Let us hope that you can do it in the coming years.
And this is another quadruple crossover.
That's right.
Yeah.
Oh, quadruple. Quadicross.
I'm just not sure that there has been a game better suited for the four of us, or that has those moments of just like, how could you have more fun with the four of us than playing Archipelago?
Absolutely. And I think that it caters to a lot of all of our respective tastes, like in different proportions maybe, but like the semi-co-op nature of it and the way that we love to just to like be competitive and sort of be talky with each other about the things that we have and what we don't have. It is so perfect for us. Absolutely. It just so wholly unique.
King of the Pineapples, Archipelago.
That is Kellen's number 2 and my number 5. Best game of all time.
Kellen started this episode by saying there's nothing like playing a good card game. And I'm going to prove him right, because my number 2 favorite game of all time was my number 2 favorite game of all time last year and the year before. It's sticking around. It's a game about trees. It's Arboretum. Arboretum is, for me, the most knife fight in a phone booth game that there is. It's a fairly simple game in terms of what you're doing on your turn. On your turn, you are drawing a card, you're playing a card, and you're discarding a card. That's all you're doing on your turn. But that's where the fun is. Let's start with the first part, drawing a card. You can draw a card from the shared draw pile, but you can draw a card from anybody else's discard pile, and that's just something I love about this game. On your turn, you're going to discard a card, but whenever you discard a card, you know that you're just leaving something out there for somebody else to take. And that's just such a gut-wrenching decision that you have to do every single turn of the game. Furthermore, at the end of the game, the way that scoring works is, over the course of the game, you're playing cards to your tableau. You're building this arboretum of trees. But the way that you score a type of tree or a suit in this game is you have to have in your hand the most points of that suit to score. So you could be building this really great string of pine trees, but if you don't have more pine points in your hand than anybody else, you're scoring 0. So there's the natural push and pull right there of, yeah, I want to build a nice string of these pine trees that are going to score me a lot of points, but how can you do that when you also have to reserve some in your hand in order to make sure you have the most points to score any? Because there is nothing worse in a game of Arboretum than building this long chain of like weeping willows only to find that somebody else has one more point than you and score nothing in that case. For me, Arboretum is the game where on your turn, the thing that you want to do more than anything else is to pass. I always feel like the optimal move for me in Arboretum is to pass. If I could only pass my turn, I'd be happy, but I have to do something. And that's the beauty of Arboretum. Every decision is absolutely gut-wrenching. And that's the reason why I love Arboretum, my second favorite game of all time.
It's like, did you hear what you just said? We all talked about the hidden depths and all the crazy complex systems of Archipelago, and you just said, like, on my turn, I'm desperately worried about my pine points.
That's right. Simplify things. You got all these systems going on. I'm saying strip that out. Like a
I was
tree.
thinking it was
out.
funny because like in your second favorite game of all time, you just want to like not play
That's
the
true.
game.
That's very true. That's true. It's the grand mystery of Arboretum.
My second favorite game of all time is actually a game I'm nervous to talk about because I don't think there's a game that I more deliberated about putting at the spot than any other. And I admit now to my co-host that I've been maybe appropriately deceptive about this game in the prep for this episode. My second favorite game of all time is The Resistance. This was previously my number 1.
Neilan, don't do this.
This is Kellen's 8th favorite game of all time. I don't want to get too hung up on the reasons why it's might move down. We will get there, but let's take a moment to celebrate what The Resistance is and why it's an amazing game. The Resistance is...
Neilan, don't be sad that it's gone. Be happy that it never was.
You do. For a minute, I thought you were going to cry. Your lips were kind of quivering.
The Resistance is, in my mind, the social deduction game. And what I mean by that is, there are other games on my list that I love along the genre. We've spoken about Deception, we've spoken about Werewords and Insider. But to me, it's like there is the social deduction as a genre, and then there is the Resistance sitting above it. And that's for a couple of reasons. I think it boils down and so intensely, ionizes everything that I think that is so good about social deduction as a genre. It often gets denigrated as a game that is just about shouting at people for an hour, but I would put it to people that would claim that you have not played it with the right people, you have not played it enough, and you've maybe not played it with some of the mechanisms and the roles that elevate it above a lot of other social deduction games, which are just about lying and shouting at your friends for an hour. The Resistance is, I guess we should describe it really quickly. The Resistance is a game where you are split into two teams, either the spies of the Resistance, except you don't know who is on either team. You're going to look at your cards secretly. There will be a quick process where the spies will know who each other are, but the Resistance won't. And then it's about going on a series of missions where you take people at the table with you. And if you are a spy, you can sabotage those missions to get a point. If you are all Resistance, you can succeed those missions to get a point, and the first team to 3 points wins. The twist on this, which elevates it, is the assassination rules, which were introduced in Avalon and made their game to the base game through the Hidden Agenda expansion, which introduces little undercurrents of hidden information where you know something about the people at the table that other people don't know. Other people want to use that information against you to win the game for themselves, but the people on your team have to try work out what of the information that is being presented to them is that important information and how best to conceal it from other people. It starts just adding wheels within wheels of the social deduction where you're reacting to the things that people are saying, trying to elevate and escalate the information that's important without giving away too much. And I think that so beautifully changes the underlying nature of the game to me personally. So much so that I would never recommend anyone play the Resistance, maybe not at first, but without the assassination rule set.
I think the fundamental thing that's really hard here with games like Time's Up, Title Recall, games like The Resistance, and even games like Gloomhaven is that they just don't fit the typical mold, and so ranking them all like this is hard. And The Resistance, if you don't get it, you don't get it. And you may just not be built to play it, but if you like any form of social deduction, if you like anything in that realm, if any of this sounds interesting, you can't beat The Resistance. You just can't. It's so streamlined. It's taken from Werewolf and pared down, and there is that current of players who like this game. They're all excited about Blood on the Clock Tower coming out, and then they're going to come back to the Resistance Avalon. It's just going to happen. It hasn't been beat in that refined form. It is so elegant for what it allows. But you do have that undercurrent of board game player who's going to say, it's just who can lie better. It's just who can shout better. And for them, social deduction is just not a genre in the same way that Pictomania is just not a game because I don't like the 40-yard dash. Neilan, don't do this. Let's swap back.
I think if you'll indulge me a little bit more, I do think I need to talk about why this has moved down. I've played a lot of the Resistance. I have played so much of this over the year. It was one of the first games, again, I played in the hobby. I think maybe on my first game night with the Dean game night where we all met. I played this with co-workers. I played this with friends online around the world. In total, I played probably over 200 games of the Resistance. A large chunk of those games have been with the same group of people, so much so that the way that we've evolved and changed our metagame over the course of what's been about 5 years is so profound. And one of the reasons why I think that the game exists over and above its rule set, and why I think people that haven't dived into it as deeply as I have, and by dived into it as deeply, I'm not saying that the rules have substantially changed. There's not that much depth in the rules to allow a late meta realization, but the way you play it with people, especially if they are repeat players, especially if you know each other and you know how everyone plays, will so substantially change over the course of time in a way that is, again, in games I'm playing with people that I've played Resistance with for 5+ years, as recently as this year, I can point to specific meta changes in the way that we bounce off the way other people in that group play. I can't think of another game that's quite like that in that regard. That said, I think that I've played so much The Resistance at this point that at points in time earlier in this year, pre-COVID, where I was sitting around the table playing it, introducing to new people, I kind of just had this little thought of, this isn't giving me as much of the same thrill and the same excitement to like want to like throw new people at it as it once was. And I think that this is kind of what I was talking to a little bit about, like the legacy versus recency thing. Like at some point, like it's taken a very, 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 very long time, but the diminishing returns maybe start to settle in at some point for me, given how much of this game I've played.
And since your number one has no player interaction in it, it just means that you haven't played it enough for it to...
Exactly. That is my number two, the second favorite game of all time. The fantastic, the always will be fantastic, The Resistance.
Well, we've made it to number one. We're here. We're a little sad after Neilan gave us the news.
We've lost a brother.
But we are very excited about number one, because the number one game of all time is Innovation. So Innovation is also Kellen's number one game of all time, in case you didn't know that.
Hello, fellow gamers.
Innovation is a tableau building card game. Carl Chudiak has a style.
Classic Carl.
Yes, classic Carl has a style that is unlike any other game designer. And I think that Innovation just does it the best. There are really, really wild card powers that even after playing, and I've talked a lot about this because obviously it's my favorite game of all time, and I've played this more than any other game, including Time's Up, which we played a lot. Even after playing this hundreds of times, there are still cards that come up and you cannot believe what they can do. And every single time a card comes up, it's in combination with other cards. And so even if you've seen it before, one, it's not going to be able to be used in the same way. And two, your board state, your tableau is probably completely different than it was the last time you saw this card. So it's just creating such a different and unique experience every single time you play that I am always excited to start a game of Innovation. I'm always excited to teach someone Innovation. It is just endlessly replayable. It is endlessly stressful. It is the game that if I lose a game of Innovation, I know exactly what I did wrong, and I'm so angry. I want to challenge you to a rematch because I know I can beat you next time.
Well, that's the last 5 years of my life.
What?
Her losing and then asking for a rematch.
That's not true. Kellen and I used to play this a lot, and then we stopped playing it once I was beating him too often. So that's the true version of the past 5 years.
I think Innovation speaks to the greatness of Innovation. Like, I don't even enjoy two-player games all that much, and Innovation is almost primarily only a two-player game for me. Christina and I have played it probably hundreds of times together, and my biggest mark of success for Innovation this year was we organized a Innovation tournament on the Discord where I was schooled. Not beaten, but schooled by a user Codename 1, and I've even gone back and looked at those games. It is the game where you'll flip over a card and say that's overpowered, and then you'll flip over another card and say that's overpowered. And just that feeling and that tempo and that back and forth fight. If you primarily play two-player games, and I know is something that people ask us constantly, well, how does this work at two players? And if you're okay with a little bit of chaos, well, a lot of chaos, a lot of take that fightiness, but that you can get better at it, and you can control the torrent and all of the powers through the ages, I challenge you to provide a more varied experience that costs under $20 that you can play as many times as Innovation. There are 4 expansions. I have them all, and I don't even use them. It's 1 out of 10 games that I'll even bring out an expansion because you don't need it.
They're fun, but just unnecessary.
Is this on either of your lists?
I think it's quadruple.
Yes, quadruple crossover.
There's a quadruple crossover.
That's cool.
As it should be.
Carl Chudiak makes multi-use card games, and we've covered a few of them. Glory to Rome, if you wanted a little bit more controlled, and innovation if you like that sort of CCG dueler, if you like the fightiness, if you like the back and forth. Neilan talks about a game just wearing out its welcome after X number of plays, and I'm hundreds into innovation, no question, and haven't gotten there. Apparently, also, I haven't gotten good, which sucks. But it's this small, unassuming box. It's less than $20,
and it's just so captivating. Like, you will be glued to your seat the entire time because it's so tactical that there is never a moment where you're not thinking, oh my God, okay, well, how do I respond to that? What can I do? What can I do? Okay, I can do this. And it's like so exciting when you figure out you have to look at things a new way. It like taps into this part of your brain that most games don't, where you have a plan, you're so excited to do something, and then something happens and you're momentarily devastated. But then you look at the board and you have to like run all these not numbers, but like run all these scenarios, and then this light bulb goes off and you're like, oh my God, what if I did that? And then you switch what you're doing just slightly, just ever so slightly, or you make a huge change, or you blow up the game because you think that's your only shot at this point. It's just like,
and that's literally possible with vision late in the game.
Late in the game, that's possible.
I don't like what's happening.
I have done it. It's just like, and I didn't even know that was possible. That was a recent game I played. I had never seen that card prior to that game, and I'm just like, how am I still having games that are unlike any other game when I play innovation? It is outstanding. I wish everybody could play this all the time. It's so much fun. Also, a fun fact for prior listeners before this year is that I have had innovation in the number 1 spot of my top 50 list longer than Kellen. Because Kellen used to have...
What are you talking about?
Kellen used to have Cosmic Encounter as his number 1, and then Innovation was his number 2. And Innovation, for as long as I have had a top 50 list, has been at spot number 1, numero uno. So take that.
You reminded me of something in what you were saying earlier, Christina, about how I've played innovation on Board Game Arena, where often when I'm playing a game on BGA, I will like take my turn and then just walk away and wait for the thing to come around. On innovation, I'll like take my turn and I'm just like staring at the screen being like, play now. I need to see what happens next.
Exactly. It's almost like that feeling of watching like a scary movie where you're literally on the edge of your seat and you're like, come on, take your turn. I know what I think, oh my gosh, you're playing this. Oh my God. Like it's so exciting. It's just unbelievable. That is the best board game of all time.
Which I think is a fact now that 2 of 4 agree.
Yes. Innovation. Thank you, Carl. We love you.
Classic Carl.
We love you, and we'll never call you that again because you're better than that.
Nothing wrong with being classic. What's wrong with being classic?
I feel like we need to give him like a doctorate or something, like an honorary doctorate.
All right, we'll talk about it.
Okay.
We'll discuss it with the board. All right. Now's the moment everybody's waiting for. My number 1 game. Christina's number 31 game, Neilan's number 51 game, and Kellen's number 51 game of all time is Biblios. For all you that are out there that are doing the averages, just make sure that you have those numbers in. It's my 1, Christina's 31, and Kellen and Neilan's 51. I've seen their lists. That is a fact. Moving on to the game. Biblios. Look, this may be your first episode of our show. If you want to learn about Biblios, just go back and listen to any previous episode because I'm sure I've mentioned it.
Any episode.
That's right. Biblios has everything. I've said this before. Why don't you listen to me? It has set collection. It has auction. It has drafting. It has everything that you want in games in a super small package, in a super small time frame. It's got everything. I'm not going to explain it to you now.
Even monks.
Even monks.
Wait.
The elusive monk.
Phases does Biblios have?
I'm glad you asked, Neilan. It has the perfect number of phases. 2 phases. I'm not going to go over this game. You got to get this game. Get Biblios. It's the best game of all time. It'll give you everything you ever wanted in a game in a small package. It's wonderful. You don't have to play for 5 hours. You don't have to have 15 people. You don't need anything. You need a book-shaped game sitting in front of you, and you're good. And you know what? It's got dice, but guess what? You don't have to roll them. You don't even need to do the dexterous task of rolling dice. You just put them down. Don't even worry about that. If you got a small table, dice aren't going to fall off the table because you're never rolling these dice. I can't stress enough that you're not rolling these dice. Biblios is the number one game of all time. Done.
I can't wait for the upcoming steampunk version. That's the Biblios retheme.
Didn't we find out there's a Pokemon retheme of Biblios?
Steve Finn
Himself.
did a Pokemon, himself.
Yeah.
For his son.
Mr. Finn himself.
That's right.
Dr. Finn himself.
Dr. Finn.
Finn, yes.
Sorry,
Thank you.
sorry. Dr. Finn.
He's got a legit doctorate, not like Carl.
Excuse me, sir?
But he doesn't get to be called the Doctor, so just nobody get confused.
That's
about
fair. That's fair. Let's not get crazy. All right. Wrap us up.
Okay.
it. All right, Neilan, we've all been
The
waiting.
big surprise.
Out.
And remember that our favorite games of all time are $15. $15. And then
Exactly,
what is your
yeah.
cost
So to
again?
go with all our very quick, breezy $15 games, my number one, my first favorite game of all time is A Feast for Odin. A Feast for Odin is, to my mind, Uwe Rosenberg's magnum opus. It is the culmination of a lot of his designs brewed and distilled together in a way that so perfectly caters to what I want out of a strategy board game. It is a game where you are playing as a Viking tribe and you are doing a bunch of Viking because there's like you're like raiding and pillaging, you're farming, you're breeding animals, you're building houses, you're exploring, you're fishing, you're whaling. You're just doing so much stuff because the centerpiece of a game of A Feast for Odin is this massive worker placement board with a ton of worker placement spots on it. It has elements of, games that it clearly draws from in the likes of Agricola, where some of those spots are merely about acquiring resources. Some of those other spots are about turning those resources into food so that you can feed your Vikings. But at the center of this game, the weirdest thing when you see this thing laid on the table is that all of this feeds into this polyomino tile laying puzzle. I've spoken a lot about polyominoes on this podcast. In this top 50, like Patchwork has come up, another Uwe Rosenberg game, as one of my favorites. Again, it's the marriage of Agricola. It's the marriage of Patchwork. It fused into a game that shouldn't work, but does. Everything feeds into collecting stuff, whether that's stuff you acquire through whaling, whether that's stuff you acquire through animal breeding, whether that's stuff you acquire through cultivating crops. All of those come in the form of tiles, which you then have to manipulate into specific colors, into specific shapes, in order to place them on your board, in order to cover up the negative points which you start out with. So you're doing all of this in the service of this giant puzzle that's going to be filled with different colored shapes, with little pieces of silver that you're collecting. Everyone's board, unlike in a game of Patchwork where everyone's just made a rough quilt, everyone's board in the Feast for Odin is going to look completely different as the sum total of all the cool things that they've been doing, which are probably completely different to all the cool things you've been doing. I think one of the things I appreciate the most about The Feast for Odin is that it has a very sandboxy nature in that you can explore parts of the game without devoting any time to some other aspects. Like, you don't have to go raiding if you don't want to this game. I've often played games of Feast for Odin where I just arbitrarily decide, this is the game I'm going to go whaling. And some of that is a little bit helped by these occupation cards, which are designed to like nudge you in specific directions. But I can't think of another strategy game where I just sort of at the start of a game arbitrarily decide, this is the thing. This is the one part of this grand smorgasbord of stuff that I'm going to focus on this game and still feel rewarded for having done something different. It's a very long, heavy game, but at no point during that do I feel like I have like the mental sort of anguish that I associate with long, heavy games. There's something so pleasant about just acquiring stuff and turning it into other stuff and laying it on your board that even teaching this to my non-gaming partner, a process I was dreading, she really, really loved. And we played it a couple of days in a row. This is a 2-hour board game with someone that doesn't play a lot of board games. Like, it's something special, man. It's just like, it's such a culmination of all the things I love about strategic board games boiled into one beautiful, mad design. Yeah. I want to say, before I finish out, that the game is only improved by the addition of the Norwegians expansion. I would not play this game any other way. It goes towards addressing some of the interactivity problems, I think, that exists in the board game, especially at the lower player counts, by making the player board variable on player count and introducing competition over spaces that do really feel tense as you get to the midpoint of a round. And you're thinking like, oh man, if I don't do this, I'm not going to be able to get to do the things I want to do, which is what you want from a worker placement game. It's not as mean and competitive as other games in the genre, but Norwegians nudges it closer towards that direction in a way that does feel good.
I think you described Uwe Rosenberg games and didn't use the word, but kind of they somehow are more charming than like all of the individual pieces, and when you play one, like you were just charmed by it,
exactly,
in some weird way. And I think that you did a good job of sort of expressing that, but it's hard to articulate what that
right
is.
And to some extent it's just like the almost like pastoral themes of it a little bit, like you're building farms and animals, and it just has this thematic pleasantness to all of it. That is A Feast for Odin, particularly and especially with the Norwegians expansion, my favorite game of all time.
Wow, you made it to the end with us, guys. The top 50 board games of all time. Thank you so much for listening to the Board Game Barrage podcast. We're a weekly board game podcast that releases every Thursday, where we cover the games that we've played and some unique insight into the hobby or discussion around things that are going on in the world of board gaming. We'd encourage you to stick around. We've got a lot of cool stuff in the upcoming year for 2021. You can talk to us about our picks on Discord at boardgamebarrage.com/Discord. You can email us at boardgamebarrage@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook. We're going to be doing more Twitch live streaming this year. We have grand plans. We'd love for you to stick around. Thank you so much to our patrons, where we do a bonus episode of the podcast every single month. We could not do it without you. We're excited to get back to our regularly scheduled programming, I think. This is always a big countdown, and we've gotten here to the end, and Neilan betrayed us in the 12th hour. Thank you.
Best shadow.
No, Christina.
Thank you, Christina.
Thank you, as always, to Heart Society Music for the intro and outro music, What's on Your Mind, Kid, from their album Wake the Queens. Thank you so much, and good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Speaking of the Doctor, I know that one, he's not on any of our lists this week, and I know that two, we're not doing any sound effects or gimmicks this week. But you know what they say about the Doctor?
What do they say?
He's the one they call Dr. Feel Good. He's the one that makes you feel all right. He's the one they call Dr. Feel Good. You guys know that one?
She has been practicing.
No, I haven't. Okay, I didn't really know the song. I knew it, but I didn't know. I couldn't think of it. So I listened to it like 7 times. And then I had it stuck in my head, so I've been singing it today. That was not my best take, I will say that. But
it is the one that's going to be used on the end of the episode.
Loaf. Yep. I think Loaf was the one on Discord who specifically requested that. So I know this isn't going to be in the episode, but maybe we could like send a message to Loaf or something.
You this is not going to be in the episode? Are you crazy?
It can't be in the episode. We promised no sound effects.
Yeah, for the outro.
Not a sound effect.
Yeah, outro is
now
yeah.
part of the record.
Yeah,
we're not like splicing it and inserting it at every opportunity. Every time we feel good about a game.
Board games, and then we'll jump right into counting them down. That was very awkward. Awkward, Kellen. I'm not a host.
It sounded fine.
I'm not like...
You're a foil, right?
Yeah.
I was going to say fool.
Okay.
Because it's like the dunce. It's like the class clown. Like, he makes the thing better. You know what I mean?
Right.
But if he's like the leading man, then he gets stage fright and ruins the production.
You don't want a dish of paprika. You just want some paprika in the dish.
I was in The Music Man as a 12-year-old.
Okay.
When Harold Hill comes to town, you know?
Right.
And I played the guy that was trying to get him in trouble, okay?
Okay.
And the Madam Librarian, you know, the attractive female lead, right?
Right.
She stops him, okay?
Okay.
She says, no, don't tell on Harold Hill. I love him, you know? And you know how she gets to stop him is by kissing him.
Okay.
So I'm like a 12-year-old.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Madam Librarian is like pretty attractive, like 17, 18-year-old girl.
Okay.
You familiar with a strike show, Mark?
I am not.
On the last show of a production, you do something weird. You know what I mean? Like you open a folder and like something crazy's in there, but then they have to stop themselves from laughing. So what do you think Madam Librarian decided to do in the strike show? She kissed me. No stage kiss. Normally, you do this. Well, I can't do it I could do it for you, but no one could hear it. She didn't do the stage kiss, and then I messed up my next line. I ruined it. And that is the story of my first kiss.
It's a hell of a story.
That's real, by the way.
I believe it.
My fifth favorite board game of all time is higher up on someone else's list. I think my time is up, so we will get there when we get there.
That's on the nose.
Well, my last one, I also said Grande, dude.
That's true. That's true.
I'm just reading the names. If I had more, it'd be so funny if I just read the names.
What if it was Sidereal Confluence?
Yeah.